Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that all of you can join me on the show. Let me make sure the mic is, there we are. There we are. I'm glad that you guys can join me on this episode. It is a Monday morning. Monday mornings are always tough because you have to effectively drag yourself and rush into the day. But we're going to rush into this day because there's a lot of news that's taking place and a lot of big and interesting news. Oftentimes on the show, sometimes I get criticism where people say, well, it sounds like you're saying contradictory things, or it sounds like the show is saying contradictory things. The show is not saying contradictory things. The show is giving points of view of the guest who comes on. So if the show says something like imminent attack, for example, Sarah Bills, that's because that was the point of view of the guests and the tenor of the conversation. There is something interesting taking place, though. And oftentimes what I try to present are the points of view of the guests. I'd give my input, but ultimately the context of the show is what is the guest's point of view about X or Y. There's been a lot of black hat points of view. And what I mean by black hat points of view is looking at a situation and taking, let's say, the more cynical path. And oftentimes the more cynical path is correct. So I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm just saying it as a comparative between, let's say, somebody like Kouakou, who would say, no, the negotiations seem to be legit. Or even Mark Sleboda, who would say, this is not five-dimensional chess. What you're seeing is effectively what you're getting out of the Trump administration, as opposed to someone like Lath, who would, or Brian Beletic, who would take a more darker tone in regards to what's taking place. Now, the rub is Brian Beletic's not a psychic, but he has been ultimately right on a lot of this stuff going back like a year ago. So, again, this is comparative. It's not a value judgment, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. I've been trying to think about how to explain this because there's two really big points of news and there's smaller points of news. For example, China and the US having talks, coming to some level of agreement where they are going to suspend tariffs, I think for like 90 days as they work through a framework. Trump has dropped his, I think, to 30%. I think China dropped theirs to 10% while they negotiate. That is kind of smaller news because that's going to develop. The two big points of news that I really want to hit, and I'm going to hit this more so with Mark, has to do with Putin effectively initiating Istanbul 2. Now, that's assuming Zelensky even shows up for those talks. Keep in mind, by law, no one in Ukraine, including Zelensky himself, can have conversations with Putin because that was the law that Zelensky passed. And so when Putin comes out and said, I talked to Erdogan, I'm willing to have these talks in Istanbul. We will pick up where we left off, and it will be an unconditional talks. Now, that is coded language, by the way. And part of the reason that this was done is because Zelensky, Trump, European leaders have all got together, despite the fact that Trump said he's going to end the war. He has lumped in himself with Europe and Zelensky saying, we want immediate ceasefire for 30 days. Okay, but this is nonsense because what they want is effectively to rearm Ukraine. That ceasefire has no conditions associated with it. So for 30 days, they aren't supposed to fight. Zelensky has violated every ceasefire that they've ever come up with. But they expect Russia to allow Ukraine to get weapons from France and UK, Germany, the United States for 30 days to recycle his men, to grab more people off the streets, to con more young kids, to get into the war, to get women involved into the war. Meaning they really expect, and they don't expect it actually, it's a propaganda campaign, but this idea that Russia is going to stop advancing on the front lines and allow Ukraine to get time to rest and reload for another campaign. This is nonsense. But again, they have no expectation that Russia is going to accept this because Russia is effectively winning on the battlefield. And the only reason Zelensky is begging for this ceasefire is because they're losing. There's that. So Russia comes out, Putin says, all right, we can have conversations. We can have Istanbul 2. We will pick up where we left off. Now, understanding where they left off was effectively a Minsk type of agreement. But as they point out, we have to recognize the new realities that are on the ground, which means the territories that are part of the Russian Federation are ours. They're not up for discussion. We will pick up where we left off. And it will be unconditional talks, meaning we're not stopping on the battlefield. The battlefield and the fight continues as we have these talks. Now, again, Putin, as he says this, knows that Zelensky can't do this because by law, he can't. So either they would have to repeal the law or Zelensky would have to break his own law in order to have these conversations. Now, Trump came out, and I'm going to show the clips of this while I have time. I just want to give context. Trump comes out and says, hey, despite the fact that he was agreeing with the Europeans early on, Trump comes out and effectively says, this is a great idea. Hey, Putin doesn't want a ceasefire, which is true. Putin wants to end the war in its entirety and come up with a larger context. I think this is great, and I think Zelensky should go over there and do it, because at the very least, we will see where each other stand and whether or not this war can end and whether or not we should, basically what's next. Now, Trump has been agreeing with the European leaders and coming up with sanctions and everything else. And Russia has already said, we don't care about your sanctions. You already have 25,000 sanctions on us. Our economy is ticking up, meaning we're like third or fourth economy. You guys have been collapsing, especially Germany. So why do we care? We don't. You have no cards. We will keep advancing on the battlefield for as long as this goes. We're winning. We can do this all week, like Captain America said. I can do this all week. And so this is where we stand. Now, we're willing to have these Istanbul 2 agreements. We're willing to have these talks without any preconditions. Are you willing to do it? Trump says yes. European leaders, meh, they don't like it. Keep in mind, it was America and Europe that got Zelensky to break the Istanbul agreements the first time around. Ukraine was agreeing, meaning they were coming to some level of agreement. It was the UK, Boris Johnson, parachuting in, saying, don't do it. You're not going to get security guarantees from us. And not only are you not going to get security guarantees from us, you effectively, if you do this, are on your own. So we will give you all the money. We will use all the economic leverage that we have at our disposal. We will give you all the weapons that you want. We'll be with you for as long as it takes. You're going to beat the Russians strategically on the battlefield. We're going to destroy them economically. It's going to be fantastic. We just need you to throw your people out there and keep fighting. And Zelensky broke off negotiations and did exactly what they asked him to do. And fast forward 800,000 dead Ukrainians later. That's where we are. Maybe 100, 200,000 dead Russians, but 800,000 dead Ukrainians later, with Ukraine losing more and more territory. Every syllable out of my mouth is more territory that they lose. And so that is the reason, that is the context to why Zelensky is begging breathlessly for a truce for 30 days. Also, from the Russian point of view, all of this is nonsense. We're winning. We're going to keep going. All right. So Zelensky says, I will do that. I will do that. And just one more point before I get to that. Putin was never against a ceasefire. Russia was never against negotiations. Their door was open the entire time. Zelensky is the one that passed the law that says there are no talks. And of course, he was the one, especially with Joe Biden backing him, we're with you for as long as it takes. Russia's trying to take over all of Europe. Putin is a madman, blah, 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 blah. So there was no context in the West to even have talks, let alone have an Istanbul 2.0 with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is like, I want to end the war. It makes me look bad that this war keeps going. I said it was going to be over in 24 hours. So Trump is all for it. Europe less so, because Europe wants to keep the war going. They don't care that Ukrainians are dying, because it's not Europeans that are dying. It's Ukrainians that are dying. It's a difference in their mind. They want to stick to the Russians. And if they need to do so until the last dead Ukrainian, they are willing to do that. Trump has a campaign promise that he wants to fulfill. And so from his point of view, yeah, go talk. Zelensky came out and said, I'll do it. Sorry. Russia was not against a ceasefire. they were against an unconditional ceasefire, meaning I'm not going to allow you to reload and get your people rested, get additional weapons and all this other stuff. This is nonsense. Why would we do that? So I just want to make it clear, it's not that they were against a ceasefire, but they had conditions on your ceasefire that were just rational. Fair enough. You don't share intelligence. You don't send weapons. You don't allow them to call up more troops and more people. Meaning, if you indeed want a ceasefire, then it has to be a ceasefire. It can't be this thing that you allow them to effectively rearm for another go at you. All right. For the Istanbul talks, like I said, the military campaign keeps going. So Zelensky said, I am for the talks, providing there's a ceasefire. So what does that mean? It means you're not for the talks. The entire point of the talks were unconditional. And if you're putting a condition on the talks that your people stop getting killed, then the military campaign continues. It's just that. You are making a condition that prevents the talks from taking place. It's that. This is where we are. So Erdogan has been open to it. Erdogan says, this is great. I'm all for it. Let's have the Istanbul agreements. I look good because I'm Erdogan. I look like a statesman. All for it. Zelensky, however, is not. Zelensky is not. Now, maybe Trump pushes him to say, hey, cut that shit out. Go talk. Maybe. But at this point, he's putting conditions on any conversations that he has in Istanbul, despite the fact that he's saying, I'll be in Istanbul waiting for you, providing you stop the military campaign, which is not going to happen. So Russia and Ukraine and Europe, for the most part, are putting out propaganda exercises. Both of them are trying to control the narrative. Europe wants to come across as if, hey, we're open for peace, ignoring the fact that it's not really peace. We're not really for peace. We just want to help them rearm. Russia's coming out, hey, we're for peace also. Let's have our talks. And let them be direct talks. None of this US nonsense. Us, me and you, or our teams having a conversation in Istanbul to end it, not a ceasefire, to end it, to deal with the overarching issues. Now, the rub here is Zelensky is a proxy. He is not his own man. And because he's not his own man, any talks that you're effectively having with Zelensky are talks you're having with the United States and Europe. And so I would imagine Putin knows that. And as I pointed out, Putin also knows that Zelensky, by law, can't really do it. So I have no idea what's going to happen in Istanbul. I suspect nothing is going to happen in Istanbul because, again, Zelensky has put a condition on what's supposed to be an unconditional talks. So there's that, which is interesting. The other thing, and I will give you the white hat and the black hat on, because it can break either way, and I'm not sure which. And to be fair, I've given mostly the black hat version of it because I'm somewhat cynical about the process, and I'm talking about Iran and the United States. So Iran and the US had talks over the weekend. They came out of nowhere. As I told you before, the talks had been, quote unquote, postponed. The US had not even registered for those talks, but apparently they ended up having them over the weekend in Oman. What's interesting about these talks, as I pointed out before, oh, by the way, Trump has approved more weapons to Ukraine. There's that too. What's interesting about these talks, I will give you the white hat version and I will give you the black hat version. The white hat version is what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. Donald Trump is annoyed by Netanyahu, has been reported. And he's annoyed with Netanyahu because Netanyahu has effectively been crashing some of his plans. He knows Witkoff was effectively, not Witkoff, Waltz was an Israeli spy that has been found out. He knows Waltz had been working behind his back with Netanyahu. He knows that. And because Trump knows that, Trump was annoyed by that. His ego was hurt because he looks weak, because it looks like he's being maneuvered by Netanyahu. And as that, the relationship between the two suffered. Now, that is what is being reported in the media. So I'm giving you the white hat version of this, meaning the what you see is what you get part. Is, for example, this. What time is it? Okay. I'm trying to get this done. The reason I'm not going through a lot of clips, which I have a lot of them, is because I want to get it before my guest gets here. Again, white hat version. White hat version. President Trump has cut ties with Prime Minister Netanyahu, accusing him and his allies of acting arrogantly and trying to push him around. According to Israeli Army Radio, Trump feels disrespected and manipulated by Netanyahu. His close associates told Israel Minister Ryan Dermer that Trump hates nothing more than apparently looking or appearing easily manipulated in public. Again, white hat version. Now, the rub is Trump's ego is such where that wouldn't be shocking to me. In the Biden administration, Biden was made to look weak over and over and over again and humiliated over and over again. And yet he would still stick with Netanyahu thick and thin, despite the fact that Netanyahu was humiliating him over again. And I remember saying, even before Trump got elected, there is no way that Trump would accept that premise. He may work with you and for the most part give you what you want. But if you make him look bad, you're going to have issues because his ego is such that he's not going to be able to tolerate looking bad. So this fulfills what I had pointed out back then. White hat version. What you see is what you get. All right. To add more evidence to this, because I want to be honest with the white hat version, I don't want to hide the ball. You get stuff like this. Witkoff having a conversation with hostage families and is saying something that the Joe Biden administration would never say. So right here, the Trump administration Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff criticized Israel in a meeting with hostage families, according to Sunday evening report on Channel 12. Quote, "We want to bring the hostages home, but Israel is not willing to end the war. Israel is prolonging it despite the fact that we don't see where else we can go, and an agreement must be reached." Witkoff commented during the meeting, according to sources present. So Witkoff, speaking to hostage families, points out Netanyahu is keeping the war going, despite the fact that there's nowhere else to go with the war. It is his fault that the hostages haven't came home. It's Netanyahu's fault. Okay, that's amazing. Joe Biden would have never done that. Nobody in the Biden administration would have ever criticized Israel in this case. So again, adding credence to the white hat version. And then you get this. Right here. The U.S. apparently is directly negotiating with Hamas or elements of Hamas. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to arrive in Israel to oversee the relief. They're releasing the American hostage. Quote, "The latest round of negotiations in Doha, conducted largely without Israel's involvement, was facilitated through indirect talks between Hamas and the United States, mediated by Egypt and Qatar. Both mediators praised the developments, quote, a gesture of goodwill and a positive step towards resuming negotiations aimed at reaching a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip." Okay, so this is, okay, you didn't see it. This is effectively saying the U.S. went around Israel to have indirect talks with Hamas in order to get the hostage release, and I would imagine come up with some kind of larger deal in the Gaza Strip. Now, under this model, Israel is being sidelined because Trump has defined Israel as being a hedge and a problem to getting anything accomplished regarding negotiations, including Witkoff openly blaming Netanyahu's government for keeping the war going, despite the fact that there's nowhere else to go with the war. That's amazing. Keep going. That adds context to this, which apparently caught Israel by surprise.
Surrogates.
Now, this has to do with Ansar Allah. If you remember, Donald Trump was bombing the hell out of Yemen, and then out of the blue made a deal with Ansar Allah saying, if you don't bomb our ships, we won't bomb your ships. We're out. This apparently caught Israel by surprise. And when Trump was asked about, hey, they're still going to do the bombing, what do you have to say about that?
The Houthis are backing down. We're seeing conflicting reports that they plan on continuing to attack Israel in support of Gaza. Does that change the equation?
No, I don't know about that, frankly, but I know one thing: they want nothing to do with us, and they've let that be known through all of their surrogates.
All right. So this apparently caught Israel by surprise. Like, whoa, they're still attacking us. And you calling it a day? Yes, we're calling it a day. We're out. We're out. They're not hitting us. We're done. We're done. All right. And there's more. You get this also coming out. Journalist Dave Relly reported at Mar-a-Lago Insider told AIPAC was, quote, getting shut out, unquote, of the Trump administration, confirmed that former NSA Waltz was working with Netanyahu to undermine the Trump administration. So basically, the objectives of the president was being undermined by an Israeli spy, Waltz, who just got fired. And more. You have this. Trump drops demand that Saudis recognize Israel in nuclear deal with the United States. So the U.S. says, hey, we'll build a nuclear plant. You don't need to recognize Israel. We'll do it. Now, if you are dealing with a petty man like Trump, who feels some kind of way about the way that you were effectively acting in regards to that same Trump, would Trump take action to either sideline you or undercut you? Now, I present all of this because I'm trying to present the white hat version, the what you see is what you get version, the version where they're not playing five-dimensional chess. Trump is just being Trump, a petty man who feels some kind of way about being maneuvered and undermined by Netanyahu and Israeli government. This has nothing to do with feeling some kind of way about the Palestinians being killed. This has to do with Trump's ego. Is his ego enough to do this? Where it's clear what you see, that there's not a hidden hand behind it. Trump feels some kind of way about looking bad in this regard. Now, the white hat version will say Trump is not smart enough to play five-dimensional chess, that this is his administration feeling like they were being subverted by the Israeli government and him taking action to get around and sideline that same Israeli government for doing so. Now, the question becomes, well, what about Iran, right? Because the demands for Iran changed. Initially, when Witkoff went and had their conversations with Iran, they seemed to be on the same page, especially from 1 and 2 rounds. When Witkoff came back and started to explain what was taking place, saying, hey, we're going to make sure they don't get nuclear weapons. We're going to cut enrichment down to 3.6. Witkoff was attacked immediately, saying Trump capitulated, Trump gave up. And of course, you can imagine Israel was working to also maximize those demands because Israel had no want for the U.S. to come to any agreement with Iran. And the fact that Donald Trump has boxed himself in, but saying, we're going to bomb them, we're going to bomb them, we're going to bomb them if we can't get a deal. Iran are very nice people, but we're going to bomb them if we don't get a deal. Then you need to get a deal, or else you're going to have to walk off of a cliff. That cliff being, you said you were going to bomb them. Now what? You didn't get your deal. All right. So the plans that the U.S. was going with has been changing. Iran's foreign minister, Arghachi, comes out. As I said, they had the 4th round. And he points out Donald Trump and his administration have been making contradictory statements, which makes getting a deal difficult. He points it out right here. They also, Witkoff comes out, takes a maximalist approach.
Iran.
Witkoff comes out, who initially was taking somewhat of a sane approach to negotiations, comes out with a maximalist approach after being attacked. And of course, this is Trump. He's just repeating and pushing Trump's line. He says
ever again. And that's our red line. No enrichment, that means dismantlement. It means no weaponization. And it means that Natan's an enrichment program can never exist in the state of Iran ever again. And that's our red line. No enrichment, that means dismantlement. It means no weaponization. And it means that Natanz, Fordo, and Esfahan, those are their 3 enrichment facilities, have to be dismantled.
All right. So he is effectively saying, hey, It's not about the amount of enrichment. They need the Libyan model. They need to get rid of all of it. All of the enrichment facilities need to go. Now, the reason that people like me are cynical about this process, and whereas I hold hope that I'm wrong in my cynicism, but I admit that I don't know, which is why I'm giving the white hat and the black hat version. It's for that. People like me, Brian Beletic, I think Sarah Bills, people who take a more cynical view of this, look at the maximalist approach that Wickoff has now moved to, with the understanding that that maximalist approach was always a no. Iran said it in the very beginning. We're not getting rid of our nuclear enrichment. Full stop. We may have conversations about the level of enrichment, but this idea that we're going to stop it is nonsense. We're a sovereign country. We can do what we want. Yes, we're having negotiations with you because you're effectively threatening to bomb us, and we want to get rid of the sanctions. But the idea that we're going to get rid of our enrichment, we have every right to have nuclear power, like every other country has every right to have nuclear power. The answer is no. And don't take my word for it. Argachi, foreign minister, says it himself. He points it out. I think it was this one, but the prime minister himself, Pezeshkian, it recently, I think it was like over the weekend, came out and says, this is nonsense. This is a no. We will continue to enrich because we have every right to do so. And here's, okay, this is not the clip, but right here. Iran rejects unacceptable U.S. nuclear demand. Well, but the rub is they rejected it from day one. We are willing to have a conversation about levels of enrichment, but we're not getting rid of our nuclear enrichment program. Full stop. The answer is no. So Wickoff is going into meetings with a maximalist demand that they know Iran is already going to turn down and deny. This was not what Wickoff was going with before, which is why Argachi points out these contradictory statements by America effectively makes it very difficult to come to negotiations. Now, the fourth round ended. The fourth round was apparently a difficult round. They're supposed to have a fifth round of negotiations, but there are rumors, I call, that say if in the fifth round the U.S. continues with the maximalist approach, then Iran is going to leave the talks, which the question becomes, okay, now what? What is Trump going to do? Trump has boxed himself in a corner based upon these maximalists and these hawks and these Zionists that are in his administration that kept telling them to get more and more, believing that these threats was going to somehow compel Iran to give them more than what they were going to ever give them. Now what? Now what? Do you back off the ledge? Do you lower your maximalist demands, realizing that these maximalist demands are never going to be met? Or do you bomb Iran? Now, I'm giving the white hat and the black hat because the reason why I'm trying to show that the black hat and how people come to this kind of darker version of this is because you knew that this was a red line from the very beginning. You go into negotiations with this notion of threats to try to compel behavior. I suspect that there are people out there who was boosting the Trump administration and was trying to make these threats even more inflamed, talking about nuclear strikes on Iran and all this other nonsense. But the entire point of it was, we need to get something out of them that they don't want to give, and we want to use force as a way to compel their behavior. All right, they're telling you to F off. Now, if you didn't want a war, you've boxed yourself in. What do you do? What do you do? Now, from our point of view, it's, well, he did this on purpose. He knew that this was going to happen. He came up with the compelling of threats and everything else. And so now he has to follow through with the threats in order to bomb Iran. Hence, an attack may be imminent because he's boxed himself into a corner in doing so. Now, is it possible that he comes off the ledge? Yes. Trump could lower his demand, and after lowering his demand, come back and say, hey, we got a deal, and sell it to the American public as a deal. Is that what he's going to do, though? I don't know. All sorts of chaos is going to happen if Donald Trump bombs Iran. So when Iran tells you no, which they will, what do you do? It's that part. And keep in mind, Trump is doing this for Israel. So this idea that, well, Trump and Israel has somehow broken up, or the relationship between Trump and Israel has somehow diminished because of his feud with Netanyahu. Okay, that sounds good. And all of those other items that I showed you from the white hat part of it sound good. But this is the issue. This is the main issue. That stuff is, side stuff. It's this. Are you going to bomb Iran for the state of Israel, the state that you supposedly are at odds with now? That's the question. That's the rub. And so when we look at this, and people looking at this in a more cynical way come to the conclusion, this was always the plan. Other people look at this and say, well, this wasn't really always the plan. Trump got boxed into this. And in getting boxed into it, he's now trapped into having to make a choice on whether or not he's going to take the world to a level of shit and piss that we have not seen in our lifetimes. What is he going to do? It's that. I don't have an answer for that. It could break in two ways. If you're talking to more black hats, they would say, he's obviously going to attack Iran. This was the entire plan. He's going to say we did negotiations failed. And after negotiations failed, we didn't have a choice. And so, Israel or the US has both working in tandem in order to go after the Iranian government. But again, if indeed he's supposed to have this kind of breaking relationship, are you really going to take the world to this level and destroy your presidency for a rogue state? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Now, as I told you, I was always cynical of these negotiations. I was cynical because, for one, Trump has been completely obsequious to Israel. Two, regardless of what president was in office, U.S. has had a foreign policy that has gone in a very specific direction, whether it was Obama, whether it was Bush, whether it was Joe Biden. All of these people, for the most part, had a foreign policy that went in a very specific direction. We're going to destroy one country in the Middle East after the next. And that's what they did. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Sudan is a basket case, and now you have Iran, last man standing. You have a huge number of neocons, huge number of Zionists. You have agitation coming from the Israeli lobby. You have all of these people that want a war. And you have one man who supposedly got in office saying, I'm going to end wars, not start them. So the catch becomes, what does that peace candidate who supposedly wants to end wars, not start them, what does he do now that he's allowed himself to be boxed into a position, believing that him being a bully would get what he wants, and then he doesn't get what he wants? Now what? Now what? I gave you the white hat version because I wanted to be honest about the white hat version and give you why they look at that in the way they look at it, saying, what you see is what you get. Trump is not playing five-dimensional chess. He's not smart enough to do it. Here is evidence that he has some issue with the Netanyahu government. By the same token, on this side, okay, well, if you end up bombing Iran, you're doing effectively Israel's bidding. You're not doing it for us because we're not under threat. So if you're indeed at odds with Israel because you feel like you're being maneuvered, okay, well, you got maneuvered into this also if indeed you were the peace candidate and if indeed you didn't necessarily want a war. So do you go through with it knowing that you got maneuvered on this other stuff and knowing you already look bad because you had a spy and you miss and you were doing the bidding of the Israeli government? What do you do? It's up to you to believe one way or the other. I told you I didn't have a full-throated point of view on this because I didn't necessarily know. My point of view was more cynical, yes, but it was cynicism with a hopefulness. And the fact that the hopefulness was in it, by definition, means that I didn't come down with a hard point of view one way or the other. I was just looking at this from a historical context and looking at what Donald Trump was doing and the people that were around him. Right now, though, Trump has to make a choice. Can't sit on the fence. Either you bomb him or you back off. Now, I would tell you that in the Russian case, respect is taken at the barrel of a gun. And it's unfortunate that that's the world we live in, but that's the world we live in. They didn't respect Russia until Russia shot 800,000 Ukrainians in the face. And when NATO realized, oh my God, we just lost the war. And when Trump comes out and says it's a proxy war and they're going to take all of Ukraine, okay, well, that means the US just lost a proxy war. You have to deal with those guys on even terms, not just even terms. They're giving you demands. They're giving you demands because you lost the war. Losers don't get to dictate terms. Okay, well, the same issue may be for Iran. The respect is not there. And because the respect is not there, Trump may think Israel can do limited strikes, or we can help them do certain strikes. The rub is, though, if you get planes shot out of the air, if you fail in your task on this, that's a new world. The trade war didn't go your way. The war in Ukraine didn't go your way. And I suspect that this war, if indeed Trump is stupid enough to attack Iran, it's not going to go his way. So the president has choices to make. Those choices are going to have epic consequences if he indeed goes through with it. If he backs down from it, even that has consequences, with people calling him weak, saying he capitulated, or whatever. Trump is going to have to find some face-saving mechanism if indeed he wants to step back from the cliff. That face-saving mechanism is lowering your demands, accepting something on even terms. Basically, get rid of the sanctions, you can keep your enrichment, blah, 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 and you go across the U.S. saying, hey, I got a deal. I said I was going to get a deal with Iran. I got a deal. It's a better deal. And you lie through your teeth like you typically do under normal circumstances about pretty much anything else. That is his way out. Will he take that way out? That is the question that we're stuck with. I don't have an answer for that question. If you want to white hat it, you could say some of the missile or the bombers got pulled back from Diego Garcia. And because the bombers got pulled back from Diego Garcia, it's signaling that a strike from the U.S. point of view is not going to occur. That may be true. There was a huge number of armaments, though, that were at Diego Garcia just because a few were pulled back. That may not mean anything. We're stuck with a question that the president of the U.S. is going to have to answer. I don't have an answer for it. Black hats will say he's obviously going to attack Iran. White hats will say Donald Trump may not want to do this, in which case Donald Trump may find a way out of this. This is a fork in the road, and we will see which way it goes. Either way, it's fascinating. Either way, it's fascinating. All right. I want to bring in my guest. That was long enough for an explanation of what is taking place. And I was able to get through it, so I'm happy I was able to get through it. However, I am joined with my man, Shobhan Saxena. I finally have a bio for you. Thank you very much, by the way. Shobhan Saxena is an Indian journalist based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and a career spanning more than 30 years. He has reported for the Times of India, the Hindu, the Indian Express, and various other publications in India. Right now, he is an international correspondent for DD India, the international channel of Indian public broadcasting. That is a damn good bio, Shobhan. Thank you for this, man. How you doing? You doing okay?
Morning, Jamal. How are you? Morning to you and to all your viewers who are watching this program.
Oh, thank you. We have a good audience here. I mean, they 470 people decided to come by and listen to me give a monologue. So that is impressive. Thank you for joining me, man. I'm glad that you could join me, especially helping with the coverage of the war or skirmish. I don't know what you want to call it. It clearly was escalating out of control. Drones were being shot at each other. Airplanes were being used to bomb each other. The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Sharif, came out very early, and he effectively said, Pakistan has won. I'll show you the clip. I want to get your take on it. Might as well get you to start there. And just to be very clear, the skirmish lasted for several days. And we're in the fog of war, so we don't know exactly how many people died on each side. But clearly, it was escalating in regards to its tenor. It wasn't going back down. But Trump comes out and says, hey, I was able to get a deal. Trump says he got a peace deal between both. It may be a truce. We can talk about whether or not it's a fragile truce, and we can get into it. But this is the Prime Minister of India. He comes out immediately and declares victory.
this is against our principles. We have been successful in our principles, and we have done the same with the enemy. What with a very respected nation does. And this is also a success for the army, and the whole Pakistani nation has become successful, and we have won. This is victory. This is great, and this is, we are very.
He clearly comes out and says, this is victory. We won. We beat India back. That's what we did. This is a victory for the entire nation of Pakistan. Is this a victory? I mean, it's like, it's pretty wild. Like there's a ceasefire and he comes out and declares victory. Give me your take on that. And what did India think? I would imagine you guys heard that. I would imagine that played on your media. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But I know you're not hearing that for the first time. You covered this stuff as much as I do. Give me your thoughts on that comment.
Thanks again, Jamal. I think we are barely out of the fog of war, and all kinds of claims are being made by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, the President of the United States. I think the hostilities or the Indian military action began, I think, on May 7th, 8th night. And from the beginning, we have been talking about this issue on your show for some time, and I said again and again, there won't be a war. There won't be a full-scale war. There won't be a nuclear strike. Nothing of the sort. There'll be some action from Indian side. Pakistan will retaliate, and then it will be all be over. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I didn't have any information, but the thing, there's a pattern to it. In 2019, India had attacked a location where there was a terrorist camp in the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and Pakistan had retaliated after that. And after some time, after 2 or 3 days, there was no hostility. So this is the pattern of what happens between India and Pakistan. So when the Pakistani Prime Minister says there's a victory, I'm really baffled. What kind of victory is? I mean, there has not been a war. So what have they won? I don't know. But anyway, be that as may. Also, Donald Trump claimed that he was able to negotiate a ceasefire between India and Pakistan.
I'm
That
glad
was
you
the
said
purpose.
that.
All right, okay,
Because I'm going to show you this. So this is Trump's comment on this. Trump comes out and says he got his first foreign policy win. And he comes out with a tweet, of course, is always in a tweet. After a long night of talks mediated by the United States, I am pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both countries for using common sense and great intelligence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And of course, he is claiming that it was the United States that secured the ceasefire. And the media in the US was reporting that India was the one who went to the US to get them to do the ceasefire. Give me your take.
This is according to CNN, actually. I don't think, yeah. So I won't trust CNN on any foreign policy matter, and then we can have a separate discussion on that. First, let's talk about what Trump said. Not only Trump, I think also the Pakistani Prime Minister. He also thanked Donald Trump for the ceasefire. So they're kind of acknowledging that the U.S. role. But to be very clear, no one from the Indian government, no minister, no official has acknowledged that. There has been complete silence from the Indian side on this. And the Indian position, what I've been listening to Indian television for the past few days constantly, and also reading what's happening in Indian media, is very, very clear. The call came from the Pakistani side. Look, there's a position in India and Pakistan called DGMO, which is Director General of Military Operations. He's an officer of Lieutenant General rank, and there's a hotline between the DGMOs of India and Pakistan. That hotline is always active. They can pick up the phone and talk to each other about what's happening at the border, if there's some firing is happening. That's when this hotline was established. And according to Indian readout, it's very clear the DGMO of Pakistan called Lieutenant General Rajiv Ghai, who's the DGM of India, and they had a chat, and after that decided to announce the ceasefire. This is the Indian position. Very, very clear. Now, talking about Donald Trump, I don't want to really criticize the US president here, but there's a pattern to it. Jamal, you must remember when there was a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, Donald Trump was not even president, but it was him who announced there's going to be a ceasefire.
Right.
Joe Biden was still president, but it was Donald Trump who announced there's going to be a ceasefire. And because he had sent his representative Witkoff, I think, to take part in those negotiations. And let's see how we all know how well that ceasefire is holding. But that's another matter. A couple of days ago, I think he announced there's a trade deal between the US and UK. There's no trade deal. They have agreed to have a trade deal in the future, right? Again, yesterday, it was announced again on Truth Social that China and US have reached a trade deal. No, they have not reached a trade deal in Geneva. What they've done, they've agreed, I just read in The Guardian today, they've agreed to pause the tariff war for 90 days.
Right.
They could discuss, a trade deal will take months, if not years, So I think Trump probably is the only world leader who posts his own tweets in real time.
Right.
and has a habit of getting ahead of himself,
Yeah.
and he, everybody knows he believes in winning. He believes so much in, a foreign policy win, a trade win. So I think this is his position. I can't deny there was, of course, there were talks between Indian and American officials, and Pakistani officials and US officials, and that happened throughout the conflict, even before that. It's a known fact. No one can deny that. Rubio, J.D. Vance, Trump, they all spoke to Prime Minister Modi. They also had been talking to Pakistani side. But to claim that they mediated a ceasefire, I think it's a tall claim. And a ceasefire was bound to happen, and it happened. And what are the reasons for it? That will be clear. That will be clear in the soon. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has spoken and has claimed victory. The Prime Minister of India is going to speak tonight in a few hours, and then we'll have more clarity about what really happened. But I'll put it this way: India's interest or India's action was limited to targeting the terrorist camps and training camps or their nerve centers inside Pakistan. That was India's objective. It was very calculated. It was a very measured response. And India made it very clear from the beginning that we have not hit any military installations. But Pakistan responded by sending drones and missiles at India's military bases. India hit back. That's exactly what happened. And now there's a ceasefire because, as I said before, both sides don't want to escalate it to a full-scale war. There was no possibility of full-scale war because of a simple reason: the armies of both the countries had not been mobilized. Without the mobilization of the army, which takes weeks, it's a very big operation. You can't have a war. So this was a limited strikes operations from Indian side. Pakistan responded, and now it's over because Pakistan had to do something, as I said before. What do you call it? Face saving, or for the Pakistan military to, for the domestic consumption, they have to show. They have to make a toll claim. That's why the PM of Pakistan says, we have won. What have we won? There's been a war of 3 years or 4 years or months. Nothing has happened. It's all over in 4 days. So to make a claim like this, I think is a bit exaggerated and dishonest, in my opinion.
I am very curious about hearing what Modi says about this. Because like you said, India's point was, we're going after terrorist camps. And Pakistan's thing is, you've attacked us, now we're going to respond. And like you said, you have to respond. Like there's no world leader that can accept that without a response. The catch is that response going to be calibrated for a face-saving mechanism? Or are they, how far are they going to go with the response? I'm curious, from your take, this truce, if I'll call it a truce, is it flimsy? Is it solid? Do you think it's going to last? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Pakistan violated the truce within an hour or so. After it was announced, they kept shelling the border areas. They also sent some drones, but for the moment, it's holding up. And I think there'll be more talks. Definitely, there'll be more talks between Indian and Pakistani officials directly, and I think it will hold up. No, I think the I'll come back to what Pakistani Prime Minister said and why he said that. I think, Jamal, there are two different strategies at work here. What is India's position? India's position is very clear that in Kashmir, there's a terrorism, and that terrorism is sponsored by Pakistan. Now, it's not a new story. Excuse me. This has been happening for more than 30 years, since the early 90s. And India has responded by attacking the headquarters and training centers of Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Hizbul Mujahideen, the three groups which are mainly active inside Kashmir. So that is India's position. What is Pakistan's strategy, basically, is always to internationalize the issue, right? And that's why Shehbaz Sharif, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, he's thanking Donald Trump, because they want international mediation. They want international interference in this issue. So you have to see two different strategies at work here. That's why India limited its strikes on these centers of terrorism. India did not strike military installations inside Pakistan to begin with. But Pakistan responded by attacking India's military bases or sending drones on the civilian areas, because they want to create this fear of a wider conflict between India and Pakistan. And when there's a chance of a wider conflict between India and Pakistan, everybody knows both the countries have nuclear weapons. So of course there's a concern, and there will be some international intervention. A lot of countries are talking to India and Pakistan. It's not the US. Saudi Arabia was talking. Iran had offered mediation. The government of India is talking to a lot of world leaders, and so was Pakistan. So there's a conflict of two different strategies here, and Pakistan has always used the fear of nuclear war to its advantage. So this is what really happened.
Why would they want to internationalize it? That's a really good point. That Pakistan went to the UN Security Council. They immediately went to this idea: if we're going to attack, we're going to use nukes. You're right about that. I don't doubt it. I saw it like immediately on social media where they were talking about nukes. What is the motive for internationalizing the conflict? Meaning, if they indeed want to get this kind of international mediation, why? What objective does it serve?
So look, let's go back into history. In 1947, when India and Pakistan became independent, two different countries, there was a partition, all organized by the British. This is the gift of the British imperialism to the subcontinent. And at that time, Jammu and Kashmir was what called a princely state. It was not directly under control of the British. So there were more than 600 princely states in India and some in Pakistan, which are not part of British India. They had their own, the princes and princesses, they ran their affairs, but they had to pay tributes to the British government. So when the British left, they again played a very, very dirty game. They left more than 600 princely states the choice of being independent or join India and Pakistan. This was really chaotic, because you have these princely states all over the subcontinent. But most of the princely states, they decided to join India, not because out of some kind of charity, but there was also a movement within these states to become independent, to end the princely rule of the princes and become independent, right? And many Indian leaders, especially the first Home Minister of India, Sardar Patel, he worked very hard to bring these princely states into the Indian Union. Now, there were two princely states, the Jammu and Kashmir, and one called Junagadh. They delayed it a bit, but the king, there was a king in Jammu and Kashmir, believe it or not, King Hari Singh, if I'm right, his name. He finally decided to join India, and they signed a treaty with India to join the Indian Union. So officially and historically, it's a historical fact. It's not some kind of fabrication. Jammu and Kashmir joined Indian Union as a state of India. Of course, there were some conditions, but they joined it. Pakistan did not accept it. Pakistan's position was, since Jammu and Kashmir is a Muslim majority state, they should be part of Pakistan. That was ridiculous because the partition of India, all arranged and organized by the British, was very, very clear. Which part goes to Pakistan, West Pakistan, which part goes to East Pakistan, and what is India? And princely states were left alone to decide their own future. So the people of Jammu Kashmir, the king decided to join Indian Union. That the matter was settled. But what Pakistan did in 1948, they attacked Jammu and Kashmir. And very interestingly, Jamal, the Pakistani army at the time was led by, guess who? By a British general. They didn't have their own general. So there's a British, this is the colonial history, the British footprint is spread all over Asia, blood-soaked history. And it was led by a British general. And they sent in the tribals who live in that area, they armed them and sent them to occupy Jammu and Kashmir, basically. But the Indian Army, Indian Air Force Army, this protected. But Pakistan managed to occupy a part of Jammu and Kashmir. They still occupy that. So that is the position. The matter went to UN Security Council, and this is still there. But in 1972, after the war between India and Pakistan signed a treaty called Shimla Accord or Shimla Pact, according to which the countries should resolve the issue of Jammu and Kashmir peacefully, right? Bilaterally.
Right.
So it's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. But in spite of signing that treaty, Pakistan has always tried to internationalize issue. And as I said before in your show, Pakistan has acted, going back to its history, as always a client state of the West. They play this double game. They are partners in the war on terror, but they can also harbor Osama bin Laden. They train Mujahideens. So they have been the masters of double crossing everyone.
You play both sides. Yeah.
They have not double crossed China as yet. Let's see in the future. So they play the both sides very well. I think it's the only country which maintains a relationship with the US and also with China. How's that possible? And
just to be clear, though, your point is that they're trying to internationalize it because they want to renegotiate whatever's taking place in Kashmir.
Because when when the treaty had been signed between the state of Jammu and Kashmir and India to be part of the Indian Union, there was no controversy about it. The only controversy there is that Pakistan is occupying a part of the state. That's a controversy. And India wanted to discuss that issue at the UN. But Pakistan wants to discuss the entire issue. They say it's a disputed territory. It's not a disputed territory. The dispute is that you're occupying a part of it. So, they want to internationalize it to make it a disputed territory, and the whole thing to be renegotiated, which is out of the question. No Indian government has accepted it, and no Indian government is going to accept it in the future.
Okay, just so I just want to make sure the context is right, because this is now a coherent narrative from India. Part of the reason that the terrorists killed those people was in order to provoke a response, with the notion of being that they can internationalize that area so they can finally try to settle that on the world stage through negotiations, something that is already a settled issue. But from their point of view, they're trying to say, hey, this is disputed territory by definition because we're occupying it. And so if we can get this set on the international stage where there are mediators, then we may be able to get more out of this than what we could get now as an occupied territory. Is that the thought?
Exactly. Last year in 2024, more than 23 million tourists from various parts of India went to Jammu and Kashmir. 23 million. That's a huge number.
That's a
because
lot of money.
Kashmir is a touristy place, beautiful place with mountains and lakes and rivers. It's really beautiful, and people from India like to go there. So you can imagine 23 million is a huge number. Very few states in India receive that kind of tourists actually. And this year again, a large number of tourists, but this is the tourist season in India. April, May is hot in the plains. People like to go to cool mountain places. So again, A lot of tourists were going there, and the Pakistan, I think, the thought that this is a good time to firstly you damage the local economy because
Oh,
Kashmiri people they
fascinating.
depend a lot, they depend a lot on tourism. So if you organize a terror attack against tourists, what will happen? Of course, people will stop going there. A lot of
Shobhan,
people actually came.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is dark. This is very dark. Because
Yeah, it is.
this is now tying it to the Pakistani government, meaning this is not a rogue terrorist group that just happened to kill 26 people, 25 of which were Indian
No,
nationals.
what they call non-state actors have been in bed with the Pakistani state,
Yeah.
and not talking about the Pakistani people, the state, Pakistani state. And when you say Pakistani state, it means the Pakistan military. People have written about it, and some of the finest articles, and most critical articles on Pakistani army have been written by scholars and academics and writers from Pakistan. They call it a state within a state. But people often joke, even say it in a light manner. Countries have military, but Pakistan is one place where military has a country.
Right.
Yeah, because
Oh, that's so dark.
it has never evolved into a full-fledged democratic state. I mean, very interesting. When Marco Rubio he tweeted day before yesterday, he tweeted that we have been having talks between. He spoke to India's foreign minister, and he spoke to Pakistan's army chief. Why? I mean, he didn't speak to India's army chief. That will never happen because there's a protocol. You can't. The Secretary of State doesn't talk to army chief of another country. You speak to the foreign minister of that country.
I'm just trying
Right.
to wrap my head around something. Like, initially, the thought was, okay, this is a rogue terrorist group. But now India is taking a perspective. We don't believe this is a rogue terrorist group. We believe that the Pakistani military was trying to damage the Indian economy. And on top of damage the Indian economy, raise this to the level of an international issue so we can try to gain something that we can't gain under normal circumstances. Basically, India says this territory is ours. You're occupying a territory, full stop. And Pakistan is trying to get this mediated in a way where they can try to get more of that territory, let's say in a internationally accepted stance. And it took 26 people to be killed to do that. That is heavy. That is very heavy.
Yeah,
And that's
this is very,
that's very heavy.
it is very cynical, but this is not
Yeah.
the first time it has happened. I mean, and then Jamal in the past 30 years, more than 100,000 Kashmiris have been killed by militants, more than 100,000. And because these people oppose the agenda, the people oppose terrorism, and they have suffered. Actually, they bore on the brunt of the terrorism in Kashmir. So that has been Pakistan's strategy, and especially after 1971, when they lost the conventional war with India very, very badly, they decided to turn to terrorism because they know that in a conventional war they have no chance against India. So they invented a new strategy of bleed India with 1,000 cuts, and terrorism here and terrorism there, so that India spreads its military resources in fighting terrorism and not defending the border. So it is a cynical ploy, very sinister strategy. But because Pakistan has never evolved, as I said before, into a fully functioning democratic state, and the army continues to call the shots in that country. Literally, we all saw what they did to Imran Khan and General Asim Munir, who's now the chief of the army. He was the key player in that coup against Imran Khan, because Imran Khan was not only trying to get good relations with Russia, he's also trying to have good relations with India. He was praising India's foreign policy in public rallies, and that is completely unacceptable to the Pakistani army. And they sent him to prison. This is the history of Pakistan. All prime ministers of Pakistan have either been hanged or sent to jail or sent into exile, or they just disappear. I mean,
I'm sorry, please finish. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, in that country, a journalist just disappear on the road. I mean, they're going to work and then don't come back home. It is a very, very common practice in Pakistan. Human rights activists, lawyers. So and here the West is at fault. They've never held Pakistan to account, especially the United States, because they've been using Pakistan as a client state. Of course, it's a relationship that works to the advantage of both the sides, going back to 70s in the war of Mujahideen and the war on terror, and they have flooded Pakistan with billions and billions of military aid, mind you. They have never given money for education or healthcare or public transport,
We don't do
which have
that.
been broken.
We don't do that.
Always
We don't
money
do that
for
anywhere, to be honest. Though.
yeah,
We don't.
yeah. F-16s and you name it, all kind of weapons, in Sherman tanks and Patton tanks, and I remember the name because when India had this war with Pakistan in 65 and 71, it was all with American arms, American fighter
Is
jets,
that right? You're fighting. Is there
saber
any
jets,
belief
Yeah,
that
exactly.
America had something to do
Where?
with these terrorists? Like meaning this
Sorry?
notion of, is there any belief in India that America had something to do with this? Basically, that these terrorists didn't come out of nowhere, that these terrorists on some level was pushed to create a conflict between India and Pakistan with the idea of destabilizing this region as being bad for China, especially with like the Belt and Road or BRICS, for example. Because if I'm not mistaken, Pakistan is part of the Belt and Road, China. India is part of BRICS, again, China. And if there's a conflict between these two, it is right there basically on the Chinese border. And it's affecting this notion of any kind of interoperability between these countries and China. Is there any belief that the US has something to do with it? Or is the belief just, no, Pakistan has its own agency and they have wanted this notion of international mediation for decades. And this is the opportunity to get it.
No, I've heard that theory about BRICS and a wider conflict between US and China in the subcontinent. I think it's just a theory. I mean, this attack has Pakistani fingerprints all over. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And Jamal, also if you look at the macro picture, the bigger picture in the world, I don't think the US or China need another war at the moment, a bigger conflict. Donald Trump said he's going to end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. It's more than 4 months. And I mean, he can't even get the two sides to agree to a ceasefire,
Yeah.
They called Zelensky to the White House and humiliated him and insulted him. And Trump has even threatened Russia with more sanctions. I don't know what more sanctions can you apply against
Yeah,
Russia. But you
25,000.
can't even
Yeah.
you can't even you can't even so that is a big, I think, Hamas Israel conflict not been resolved.
Right.
Russia-Ukraine war not resolved. And you have started a tariff war across the world. I think there's too much on everyone's plate at the moment to have a war between India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
Will not help anyone. And I don't think some people also believe in India that China would have entered this conflict on behalf of Pakistan. I think that's not possible. China is not interested. China is not looking at any military conflict at this moment. They don't want it. India doesn't want a military conflict. As I said before, it was very, very clear, a limited operation against jihadi organizations inside Pakistan. India's focus is absolutely different, economic growth. India just became the 4th largest economy in the world. And now they want to be the 3rd largest economy. So the focus is somewhere else. But Pakistan, because they don't have anything to speak of in the name of economy, is $370 billion. There's no industry, rampant poverty. People are suffering. So Pakistan has this Kashmir obsession, and they believe that it is the idea of getting Kashmir from India that unites the country. Pakistan is facing a huge, massive insurgency in 2 states, in Balochistan and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is border with Afghanistan. Massive insurgency. The soldiers are getting killed every day. Yesterday there was a big attack, and day for yesterday. So so keep the country together, and also the Fundamentally, the military wants to keep itself in power. And they want to enjoy all the fruits of power. And that can only happen when there's a conflict with India or there's a fear of a bigger conflict of India that unites the country. That's what they believe. And I'm not sure it was going to work this time because the Pakistan has not resolved some of the very basic problems they have. And since this Imran Khan episode 2 years ago, I think the Pakistani army has really damaged its reputation, its image within the country. And there are a lot of people, the first time in the history of Pakistan, who are questioning the legitimacy of Pakistan army and their role in the country's political matters. So this is not the end of affair now. I think the repercussions will happen maybe slowly, but inside Pakistan and not in India. So that's why Shehbaz Sharif has to go on national television and claim victory. He has to do it, because he has to build a narrative. He has to claim victory. He has to thank Donald Trump because that is a part of his strategy, to internationalize the issue, which is basically a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. That is my understanding of the whole situation.
Shobhan, great breakdown. You always have great breakdowns, and I love the historical context. Like when I'm a sucker for the historical context of countries and how those countries evolve, and you are uniquely talented at giving and weaving that into the current day politics. And by the way, that's always lacking. Like if you're watching mainstream media, they have a memory of 5 minutes, right? They only remember 5 minutes of things that happened before. I love the fact that you can go back to 1948, 1942, 1930 something and explain it in this kind of evolving context of why things are happening. Thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. And
thank you, Jamal. It's always a pleasure. It was always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh man, it's always a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I'm fascinated by this. Your knowledge on this is just amazing. Shobhan Saxena, he's an Indian journalist based out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, in a career spanning more than 30 years. He has reported for the Times of India, the Hindu, the Indian Express, and various other publications in India. Right now, he is international correspondent for DD India, the international channel of Indian public broadcaster. Fantastic, man. Thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. Bye.
All right. That was a great breakdown by Shobhan. Look, I am a sucker for historical context. I am a sucker for people who can explain how the history of something is affecting now and weave it in a way that makes sense as a narrative. That is dark, to put it mildly. This notion of killing 26 people in order to create a pretext for a conflict and then use what is obviously going to be a conflict. Meaning, if you're playing chess and you say, okay, I'm going to kill 26 people of India, okay, what is the prime minister going to do? And the moment that you say, okay, the prime minister is obviously going to take military action, the next step is, okay, well, we all obviously have to respond. It's going to be limited, and we're going to try to get the world community involved in it in order to do with Kashmir. Now, as Americans, we don't really have a context for this because we don't have disputed territory in that way. Look, later on in the show at 9:45, I'm going to have Hamza come on and give his take. I suspect his take is going to be very different than Shobhan's. He is a Pakistani journalist. I don't know if it's if there's any value in having both on simultaneously, because the story there's nothing interlock, if that makes sense. If you and I are having a conversation and I'm saying this wall is blue and you said this wall is red, there is no interlock. There's nothing that we can agree upon as a basis of reality for us to really have a decent conversation. But I did want to give both of their takes. So Shobhan will be on at 9:45. I'm sorry, Hazma will be on at 9:45 to give his point of view of this issue, basically the Pakistani point of view. It is wild to me that Sharif came out and screamed, "We won, victory." We kicked India's ass. That's amazing. It's also amazing to me that Donald Trump declared that he had a ceasefire between the two. It's just wild to me. But I want to bring on my man, Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst, and baby father of a new channel that's coming out. I'm going to show the preview of it. You look very badass in that preview. So I like it. a lot. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Should I mug a little bit? Mug a little bit? Yeah, the wonders of
Well, your show,
wonders of AI.
Well, Real Politic with Mark Sleboda is going to be coming on Substack, and just so the audience can see it, I think it looks fantastic. Like I said, I think he looks man in darkness on this. Let me start it from the beginning. That looks great. Oh, that looks great. And I love the fact that you have all of these quotes, the books, and everything else. The John Mearsheimer, I didn't bring you on to talk about this, but I'm curious about your take. His take on China is he looks at the world through a very particular lens. And from his point of view,
he is a realist. I mean, some would describe him as an offensive realist.
yeah, but he has a lens, if that makes sense. His lens is, okay, well, Europe has been fighting these wars constantly, where, back and forth. America is a European colony. America effectively starts doing the exact same thing. If the Soviet Union had won, they would do something similar. And China is going to be the exact same thing, even though China continuously says that is not the case.
Yes.
And I've had people on who's like, look, China's worldview is not the same as these other countries. They didn't evolve in the same way. They, this kind of Confucius win-win politics. Yeah, they may be a behemoth, but not in the way of taking over countries and extracting resources, being a thumb on the scale of the way the countries do their politics. They will be something different. Mearsheimer doesn't believe that, though. Mearsheimer's point of view is China is going to act the exact same way as the United States or as any of these other countries if they gain world supremacy. Do you believe on that? What, you believe it?
Okay, so I mean, his point of view is, first of all, IR theory, right? International relations theory is, the way I regard it is, and I think most international relations theorists, professors would agree, is a toolbox. It is a theoretical toolbox for understanding the world. Right. And first of all, the same tool does not fit all situations, even if you have a favorite tool, right? I have a favorite tool. I like to use it whenever I can, right? Yeah. But and in IR theory, my favorite tool is probably realism, followed maybe closely by some critical theory. But everyone, has different favorites they like to use, but there's usually an acknowledgement that among real credible people in the field that the same tool does not fit every job.
Agreed.
There's different situations where different tools might be required to understand a situation. Now Mearsheimer is a diehard realist, right? I don't know if he considers any, and realism considers all states to be more or less alike. They are utility maximizing entities that when placed in similar situations, in an anarchic world with other states, but no power above states other than the most powerful states, i.e., no judge, no rules, no morals, nothing, that they will more or less tend to act the same way. And that when China has the power, it will abuse it in a similar way to the way that the U.S. and, let's say, the British Empire before that did. It's more difficult when you go back further in history, and I love referring to, I love understanding, considering, having read historical political theorists, right? You can see that right on my video. I love that there. But the world before a unified world of states, right, that have at least agreed to a United Nations and operate against each other, rather than, say, ancient empires and kingdoms and other types of political structures, is different.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, there has been a sea change. So it's more difficult, to try to compare the ancient city-states of, ancient Greece and make that make sense. I mean, a lot of people will try to, but I'm not necessarily sure it does.
Mhm.
And I would venture to say that if knowing its history and its culture is important, which might actually lend more to to pull a structuralist tool out of that international relations theory box, which is a big thing in European international relations theory, and argue that China will probably act differently than the United States. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it won't abuse power, right? Because I do believe that power is corrupting, but I would venture to say it is likely, I would argue against Mearsheimer, to abuse power in different ways,
Agreed.
and maybe importantly different ways. But he does, from his theoretical framework, right? There certainly is the possibility, and
Yeah.
he views it that way. So I would never say no, Mearsheimer is wrong, right? I would never utter those words.
I think I did a video saying Mearsheimer is wrong.
Yeah, because but I would say, not that definitively anymore, right? I think there's a possibility that he is underestimating the cultural differences, the social-cultural differences that might lead to political differences.
Right.
And again, once again, I do believe they would abuse power, right? All power corrupts, right?
Yeah.
But they might do it in different ways, and maybe in importantly different ways.
Yeah.
Our world of international relations theory today is still shaped by that moment when European colonial powers, armed with guns and other tools to an extent that other societies were not. Yes, I know the Chinese actually developed gunpowder first, but they didn't actually really develop the gun
Mhm.
as a military weapon to the same extent as, and cannon as the Europeans did. But they forged the world we live in today. And the argument there is because states, even China, right, has a foreign minister, it has this type of defense, right, it has this, right, it's structured like a European state because they're the ones who imprinted their social political structure on the whole rest of the world as a result of those centuries of Euro-Atlantic dominance of the world. So there's an argument to be made there. I'm not sure it's 100% compelling, and I think that all power corrupts, but the Chinese might turn out to be different.
Slightly different. Yeah,
Yeah,
slightly.
maybe significantly different.
Yeah,
but
I think that'd be different.
But it's not 100%. I would not go out on a limb and stake my claim. Mearsheimer is wrong. Let's just say I would question that. I would question that.
Yeah.
I would be a doubting Thomas on that particular issue. So while I agree with Mearsheimer on Russia and his take on the Middle East and everything, he's locked into a China is bound to the same hegemonic path as the United States, if they shift places from 1 to 2. And I'm not so sure that the future would end up like our recent past.
Agreed. Thank you for that. Agreed. I've had plenty of Chinese guests on, and they were like, Mearsheimer is getting this wrong. This is not the way we think.
Yeah.
It is not in our culture.
Have you ever heard Mearsheimer talk about when he goes to China?
Yeah.
They love him in China. They love, because despite that, his realism, right, that's something they can understand. They may not agree with it, right, but they can understand that viewpoint rather than this weaponized, hypocritical moralizing and exceptionalism that comes from Western countries, which is what they're used to. They they can understand realism, right? And therefore he's an IR celebrity to an extent in China that he's not in the United States, which is, let's just say, a travesty, an academic
Well, it's
travesty.
fascinating. I mean, because he is given an honest take on the way the U.S. government operates, which is refreshing. I would imagine if you're talking to China and it's like, well, that is what we're seeing. So thank you for being honest about the way the U.S. operates. But if you're in the
by
US,
the way, since we're on IR theory, which is my obsession, right? It's what I studied IR theory and strategic studies. But Joseph Nye died last week. Another extremely prominent and noteworthy, like 101 reading required of international relations theory. And I did not even, I would say, 50% agree with Joseph Nye. He was more of a liberal institutionalist, though he tried to give it, I think, a veneer of realism. But he was always worth reading and considering. He was very sharp. The terms that we use today, soft power, smart power, he coined all of those, right? All of those. So he's, even if you don't agree with his analysis of geopolitics today, his understanding of the world of international relations theory, I would say it's essential to have read that and take it on board. Another tool in the toolbox.
Good to know. Good to know. Speaking of international relations, we have what I consider to be, I guess I don't necessarily want to call it a propaganda war, but at the very least maneuvering that's taking place. So during the Victory Day parade, celebration, taking down the Nazis that Europe, acting like children who would be speaking German right now, didn't show up for. So there's that. I feel some kind of way about that. But anyway, you have Zelensky meeting with many of these European cokeheads, apparently. Starmer, Mears,
You don't want to see this. I'm gonna hide this here. Don't look. It's my big.
Everybody doing a little blow. That's okay. So you have all of these guys meeting. So Putin comes out and he says, "Okay, well, fine. If you feel that strongly about having conversations, well, we're not going to give you a ceasefire because that's nonsense. There are no conditions on the ceasefire." But he comes out and talks to Erdogan. And after speaking to Erdogan, comes out and says this, which is fantastic.
And I would like to underscore this without any preconditions. We suggest to start without further ado next Thursday on May 15th. Despite everything, we suggest to the Kiev authorities to resume the talks that they stopped in the end of 2022, to resume direct talks. And I would like to underscore this without any preconditions. We suggest to start without further ado next Thursday on May 15th in Istanbul, where they took place before, where they were seized.
Trump immediately comes out and says this. President Putin of Russia doesn't want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine, but rather wants to meet on Thursday in Turkey to negotiate the possible end of the bloodbath. Ukraine should agree to
the screaming plural capital letters of a seventh grader on social media.
He says Ukraine should agree to this immediately. At least they will be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible. Now, the rub with this is that Zelensky...
No. Put that back up. Put that back up.
Let's
put it back up. Let's finish the whole thing.
All right, let's do the whole thing. Fair enough.
Yeah, do the whole thing.
Fair enough. He says, all right. So he says, at least they will be able to determine whether or not a deal is possible. And if not, European leaders and the U.S. will know where everything stands and can proceed accordingly. I'm starting to doubt that Ukraine will make a deal with Putin, who's too busy celebrating victory of World War II, which could not have been won Not even close. Without the United States of America, have meeting now. By the way, that's offensive, by the way.
That
The
is,
notion, go ahead. No,
that is
please.
incredibly insulting and offensive to
Yes.
Russia, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Johnny come lately, the Westerners who did their best to make sure that World War II was a titanic struggle between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, of which they wanted to take no part and tried to stay out of it to the end. And let's be honest about ourselves, right? The numbers hold up that the Soviet over, right? The lowest credible academic instance. We're talking Western, right? Not Russian historians. 83% of German troops died on the Eastern Front.
Yep.
And nearly 100% of their nearly 1 million European fascist allies who soldiers fought on their side, right? So yeah, thanks Johnny come lately. Yes. Oh, it couldn't have been won without Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease. Yes. Yes. Thanks so much for the spam and the toy Sherman tanks that were such a joke that they were. This is what the Soviet Union did with those Sherman tanks, by the way. They sent them to the Eastern Front, right, against Japan, where that did not ignite again till the end of the war, because the Soviet Union fought a successful war against Japan in the late 1930s.
Right.
And Japan was like, Nazi Germany was like, two fronts, hit the Soviet Union from the other side. And Japan's like, no, we don't want any of that again. Yeah. We'd rather take on the Yankees. Right? So, but the Soviet Union still kept a sizable force there. And at the end of the war, that force went forward and joined the rest of the Allies in the war against Japan, right? But the Sherman tanks were used to replace real tanks in the Eastern Front that were there, so that the real tanks could be sent back west, right? That's what they used. So, but even the idea of Lend-Lease, the idea that someone should then pay the U.S. back for the aid, because they always got to make a profit, right? The Americans, always got to make a profit. And that is an excuse why Soviet boys and girls died in the tens of millions, so that Americans could only die in a scant few 100,000. No, the war would have been won. It would have been longer. It would have been harder, sure. But the war definitely would have been won without the United States Johnny come lately entry. And really, we know that the Allies only intervened at the end of the war. In the last 11 months of the war, they opened the second front because they feared that the Soviet Union would liberate and then occupy all of continental Europe.
Yep.
That's the real reason.
They thought they were going to take it all. Even for Berlin, they were like, okay, we don't want the Soviets to take all of Germany.
Yeah. And the Soviet Union was magnanimous enough and naive enough to even though they took Berlin, they then gave the Americans, the French, and the British control of parts of it, because, even Stalin at the time wanted an end to the war and a peace of a type with the West, although that proved to be really foolish in the long term. But yeah. So Russians find that statement incredibly offensive. That's that Saving Private Ryan American, or shall we say Western today, because it's really across the Western fan fiction version of history. That's what it is.
It's deeply offensive. All of it is deeply offensive.
Right.
It's deeply offensive. Look, I told you I would have killed to be at that celebration for Victory Day. I think it's something that the world should celebrate. And it's unfortunate that Europe is acting like children right now, and not just acting like children, assisting with a similar type of element to go after the Russians.
In Western Ukraine. But they did the same thing before, right? Because in the late 1940s, early 1950s, Operation Red Sox, right?
Oh, Gladio. I thought it was Gladio. Operation Gladio.
No. That Gladio was Europe. Operation Red Sox was in Ukraine, right? Politico actually did a piece on this, right? Check it out. It's not Soviet propaganda. It's recovered from U.S. Archives, Freedom of Information Act. Politico did a piece on Operation Red Sox at the end. The beginning of the Cold War. You want to know where it really started? The Cold War. The U.S. had a plan to use the Nazi veterans from Western Ukraine, right? That it had collated together, and use them to start an insurrection in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian SSR, to try to break up, the Soviet Union, at least to Ukraine. And even according to Politico, CIA agents led airdrops of these West Ukrainian, SS veterans on the ground. CIA agents led them on the ground to their dooms, because the Soviet Union had intelligence, knew exactly what was going on, and wiped them out completely. It was a complete failure. But this was an undeclared war, right? Using West Ukrainian Banderite fascists, if you want to be generous and call them West Ukrainian ultranationalists, back then. Then fast forward, 70 years, and the West is doing the exact same playbook, supporting Banderite fascists in Ukraine as a weapon against Russia. All of this has happened before, and unfortunately, history tells us that all of this will happen again.
There's nothing sacred. I swear to God, there's not.
That's why it's not just forgetting. It's not just insulting. It is obscene and perverse. But I mean, it's real. It should be as no surprise to anyone, right? Whatever they may say about their liberal values and everything, the U.S. has supported right-wing death squads and dictators. Just atrocious crimes in South America. They've supported jihadists in Afghanistan before they were against them, in Syria, in Libya, and elsewhere. The British have supported even more. Historically, they bear some credit for the entire creation of Salafism, of Wahhabism. Historically, they helped promote it. So did Israel in more recent times as well, too. In Kosovo, they supported the Kosovo Liberation Army, right? Which was, directly in bed with Al-Qaeda. And the U.S. had previously listed as a terrorist organization, and the entire West, and delisted it because they wanted them to use them as a geopolitical weapon. The Kurds, right? The Kurds were leftists during the entire Cold War, and still are, or were to some degree. In Iran, who do they support? The Mujahideen-e-Khalq, crazy, absolutely insane, brainwashed cult, right? That shared and actually committed terrorist attacks, killing Americans, by the way.
Right.
But they're a convenient tool against Iran. So is it any surprise that the U.S. and the West would support whatever extremist faction is available in Ukraine to use to try and geopolitically, capture it for the West? And that happens, to be Banderite fascist, West Ukrainian, homegrown fascist ideology following Stepan Bandera. It's the same thing in the Baltics, right? These SS veterans who fought against the Soviet Union, they're promoted, right? Ultranationalists, all. While in Western Europe, right, the EU is a nation, a national identity deconstruction machine. In Eastern Europe, that type of far-right nationalism is promoted as long as it's directed as an identity bulwark against Russian influence. And the Baltics, the yearly annual torchlit celebrations of marching SS veterans, supported with a wink and a nod by the governments there, are, a case in point, about that.
Putin has effectively raised the bar and say, hey, I've spoken to Erdogan. let's have Istanbul 2.0. And interestingly enough, he points out unconditional talks, which means the military keeps going. The military is not stopping. We're going to continue. We will have talks while the military campaign keeps going. And we will pick up where we left off with the addition of the reality on the ground, that reality on the ground being the territories that are part of the Russian Federation.
Kherson and Zaporozhye. Yeah.
Yes.
At least.
Well,
Yes,
and also
at least.
Lugan. Yeah, right. So Zelensky, after hearing Trump say, do it immediately, Zelensky says, all right, I will be in Istanbul. However, and he puts a condition on what was supposed to be an unconditional talks and says, providing there's a ceasefire. So you are basically not showing up to the talks under that model.
Yeah.
But give me your take on that. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, for one, Putin has to know that Zelensky can't do it because it's illegal by Ukrainian law, since Zelensky passed the law saying
Such as Ukrainian law actually matters. Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm just pointing out that at the very least it's on the books that he's not supposed to be able to do that. Two, Putin is obviously not going to accept these terms of stopping the military campaign for talks. Zelensky has to know that he's not stopping the military campaign. Europe has to know that the ceasefire that they were going to put out was always going to be ignored. What do you make of all of this that's taking place?
Okay, so what is really going on, right? This is all diplomatic war of maneuver, diplomatic maneuver, right? If you want to call it a dance, because I think it's more appropriate to a dance than, say, to chess or something like that. Or for Americans out there who understand, this is a game of hot potato. This is a game of hot potato. Everyone knows that this peace push, right, by the actual proxy master of this conflict, the United States, right, by the Trump administration, this peace push is going to fail, right? So right now there's a war of maneuver going on on whom the failure of the inevitable failure of that peace process will fall on, right? Does it fall on Russia or does it fall on Ukraine, right? You could argue the Europeans may be to a large extent, responsible, but they're never, going to receive the lion's share of the blame for it, right? So this is a war for what's going on. At one level, yes, world opinion, right? That's always background noise, but primarily a war for what's going on in Trump's febrile brain, right? Because everyone knows that Trump is extremely susceptible to influence. Let's be honest, right? Putin is trying to manipulate Trump. Zelensky's trying to manipulate Trump. All the European leaders are trying to manipulate Trump. The leader, the Emir of Qatar, who just gave him a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar giant luxury aircraft, right, is trying to manipulate. Everyone within his own administration, everyone is trying to manipulate Trump, right? And he cultivates this, right? He creates this kind of, he's the God emperor of mankind presumptive, and everyone should come to his court and pay court to him and try to woo him and win the argument that is going on, such as it is inside his head, right? So that's what's going on, right? Everyone knows that there's not going to be any diplomatic settlement of this conflict. It's that at the end of the failure, and Trump, throws his hands up in disgust, and pretending like he's some third-party mediator rather than as the U.S. president, the proxy master of this conflict. He's got to have someone to blame for it, right? There, maybe to some degree both, but there's got to be someone that, and this is what's going on. The Europeans don't want a ceasefire. They were against the ceasefire forever. And same thing with the Kiev regime. They turned on a dime when they realized that was not a winning argument inside Trump's head. This is why the Europeans continually at the same time they're talking about a ceasefire, the British and the French will not miss any opportunity to talk about putting troops on the ground whenever that ceasefire comes into effect. Now, forget the fact that they are crazy enough to actually do it at some point regardless. I think they might be, even though their own militaries say we don't have that capability, not even as a human tripwire force, right? Speaking to the Telegraph, British generals have said that Starmer is doing political theater, and the British military is so deteriorated, as is the French, by the way, that not only could they not engage in Russia in intensive combat, but that they couldn't even maintain a sizable force as peacekeeping or human tripwire or whatever. But the whole reason for bringing it up every time they talk about a ceasefire is so that Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire. Right? That's the whole point. Right? They know, they talked it up, that Russia will, even if Putin was considering, well, we'll give them 30 days and then maybe, when it all collapses, Trump. No, the Russian generals don't want that either, by the way. The Russian military, the brass, the Stavka, they're really fed up with this ceasefire nonsense, this Easter ceasefire, this Victory Day ceasefire. Every time the Kiev regime use it in small tactical ways to take back territory on the ground and so forth, improve their position and so forth. But again, this is part of Putin's diplomatic game. That you could make the argument at least that there's a bigger picture involved, right? So Trump has presented two arguments in the past, shall we say, 2 weeks, so longer, but particularly punched them home in the 2 weeks. He wants two things, right? And these are things that people who have talked to him, recently have left imprinted on his brain. He wants an immediate, unconditional ceasefire, and he wants direct talks between Russia and Ukraine, right? He's been on this in his social media diplomacy, if you want to call it that. I don't even know what to call it, right? Whatever, his puerile rants on social media. So the Europeans and the Kiev regime, right? The Kiev regime, herded by the Europeans, have jumped and have turned on a dime and adopted this ceasefire. And they have, they're demanding that Russia accept an unconditional 30 degrees ceasefire so that they can, of course, rearm. The Kiev regime conduct more mobilization. They can get troops on the ground down in Ukraine. Let's say it actually happened, and so forth, right? And Russia's been down this path before, right? There was Minsk 1, there was Minsk 2, there was the Istanbul communique, right? There's 3 recent ceasefire that the Kiev regime violated every one of them, so the most recent one 5,000 times or something absurd like that. Why should Russia give them a breather and give them a chance to rearm and retrain? Again, the Europeans don't really want a ceasefire either. They just want the war to continue. They just realize that this is the tack now to get a political tack to manipulate Trump properly. They're pushing for that. In fact, there is another argument that they have been considering that hasn't been put out yet, but may come into play yet, where Zelensky unilaterally declares a 30-degree ceasefire and then throws the gauntlet to let Russia violate it and be seen as, the warmonger. Right? It's just theatrics, right? I mean, yes, Russia is they invaded the Kiev regime's territory. There's no question about it. I would certainly argue that they had every absolute reason that they must do it. In fact, they're far too late in beginning it. But they are, the aggressor in this particular, big conflict, at least, situation. So Russia, in response, right, to this move, has taken the opposite stance, right? They say, we don't want a ceasefire. Well, let's go. We want direct talks, right? The Kiev regime says no direct talks without a ceasefire. And Russia says, no ceasefire without direct talks and progress made towards settling the core causes of the conflict, right? So that's the contradiction. Russia has long said that they're willing for negotiations without conditions with Ukraine, right? It was Ukraine, the Kiev regime, that walked away from the table in 2022, in the spring of 2022, at Istanbul, right? Which is why Russia has proposed Istanbul. This is the new information, that Putin has thrown down that gauntlet with a counter move, completely ignoring the demands for a ceasefire, not even addressing it, right? And said, direct talks Thursday, Istanbul, send your team, right? Right now, Zelensky is throwing back, right? He threw back with, I will gladly be there if you agree to a ceasefire. And he said he personally, so he upped it, right? So maybe you could argue that this is poker, but I see it more as hot potato. Everyone is trying to avoid being stuck with the blame in Trump's head for his big peace project having failed, right? So right now they're trying to come up with a strategy to get out of course, nothing is going to come of direct negotiations between Putin and Zelensky. And you put the two of them on a stage together, right? And I mean, Zelensky looks like a crazy little coke starting child, right? Yeah, whatever you want to call him, right? And Putin is, whatever else you may think of him, a cold-blooded master statesman, right? So that is, I do not believe that that any team of Russia and Ukraine is going to meet Thursday in Istanbul, much less Zelensky or Putin or anyone like that. I think that what we're going to see in the next week is another Bucha, another false flag or other provocation that can be blamed on Russia to give them an excuse to not engage in negotiations. That is what we're going to see.
But Zelensky has already put a caveat that kills it anyway.
He has, but then Yermak, right, his gray cardinal chief of staff, has come out with a statement that Zelensky will be in Istanbul on Thursday, whether Russia agrees to a ceasefire or not. So they're obviously still, right, because it wasn't said by Zelensky, you could argue, who is Yermak? Yermak is only probably actually the most powerful man in Ukraine, right? But we won't go there. They're still trying to decide on a strategy, right? They're talking with the Europeans right now on their next step. Do they show up? How do they show up? Can we arrange something, on the ground to blow up, to prevent it in the meantime? If we do go, how to play it, right, in Trump's head and the world cameras to our advantage. This is the game that's going on. It is a game of a perception and diplomatic maneuver, right? Everyone knows, right? But first of all, as the argument for a ceasefire, right? That you can't have any negotiations before a ceasefire. Okay, that's a ridiculous, historically inaccurate, right? The Istanbul communique was negotiated while the conflict was going on. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was negotiated by Trump while there was still fighting going on the ground in Afghanistan. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, right? These are all conflicts that the conflict continued while negotiations, sometimes going on for many years, were conducted while the conflict was going on. So the argument that there can't be any meaningful, that's just an argument to either get a ceasefire or, once again, to put the blame on Russia for denying a ceasefire. The other thing is that, look at, here is the, other than Trump, who for whatever reason, right? Obviously, he doesn't like Zelensky. He doesn't particularly care about Ukraine, right? He sees them as in bed with his political enemies inside the United States, which they were and they have been, right? He hates the European elite. He doesn't really care about Ukraine that much per se, right? But he's still the U.S. president. the Ukraine is still a U.S. proxy state, and he is just a huge machine, right? You want to call it the deep state, the blob, the hegemonic infrastructure and impetus, forcing him to do something to save that U.S. proxy state in Ukraine from the losing side of the war that it's on, right? So, he's being pressured into this. So, yes, he is trying to arrange a peace on U.S. terms at this point, right? Rather than Russia terms, right? Which is ridiculous, of course, because the U.S. is involved in this conflict and
Right.
Russia is winning it. Russia dictates the term, not the U.S. But, the U.S. being the hegemon is going to try to push everything in their direction. But
Well,
Trump is the only one who really wants peace. Russia doesn't want peace. The Europeans don't want peace. And Ukraine doesn't want peace, right? Or you could put it another way. Everyone wants peace, but only on their own terms, right? No one has had their terms met yet, right? No one has been forced. Russia wants victory, and it's defined how it's, what its terms for ending the SMO are, right? That's its terms for victory. Although it is very, very obvious that in the minds in the Kremlin, the conditions for Russian victory are growing more and more expansive and maximalist, thinking Odessa, regime change in Kiev, right, and everything as the only real way to end this in the long term going into the future. The Kiev regime has their fantastical ideas about how this ends. The Europeans, right, are scrambling for time. They want this war to continue for another 5 years while they try. And they're not trying very good so far to restructure and rebuild their military industrial complex and hope that in 4 years there's another Biden, Brandon, whatever in office to replace Trump that will return this conflict, the U.S. to its proper role in this conflict as they see it.
So just to be clear, you do believe that all things being equal, Donald Trump wants to end this war?
Sure, on U.S. terms.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
Russia doesn't want this war to end on U.S. terms.
But U.S.
His
terms, just to be very clear, as a frozen conflict with NATO peacekeepers under some other name, effectively in Ukraine.
With NATO troops on the ground.
Nonsense,
the U.S. diplomatically winning this war, even though they lost it on the battlefield. And why not? Russia won the war in Syria and lost the peace. Big time. By the U.S. simply refusing to acknowledge the Russian and Syrian victory and dragging the conflict out, strangling Syria with sanctions, and then this combined Turkish, U.S., British, Israeli Qatari penetration of the Syrian government, and military leadership, and just eroding it away, buying people out, co-opting them, so that when they set off the trigger, it all collapsed in what, 10 days? Russia had no idea that was happening. They really didn't. So do not doubt the ability of the West to twist a situation to their advantage, even when it appears they have lost.
Oh, right? I don't.
Never take that jackboot off the neck when you've got it there.
Right there. I just expect Russia not to fall for it this time. If they do, God, man, if they...
then it's like, I'm going to take up dentistry, right?
Right.
I'm done.
Let me ask you this. Does Russia really care? There's 25,000 sanctions that are already on him. Yeah, Trump is still sending missiles, or at the very least, he's pushing Germany to empty their stocks of missiles.
Yes, right now.
25 doesn't seem like much in comparison to the amount that they've been firing, but whatever. He's still sending them weapons. Does Russia care? Have they gotten to the point where they're like, look, I don't care, but the Western leaders.
Sure.
But they do seem to care about what Trump thinks. Why?
Sure they do. Right? Because the U.S. could still make this last much longer and make it much more costly to Russia
I see.
and make the end political settlement of it not a settlement, right? An open Cold War / hot war.
Yeah,
And again, always there's the, a degree of uncertainty about what the end game is, right?
Yeah.
Again, Russia won in Syria and then lost the peace, right? The U.S. could find a way down the road, some black swan, something to twist events to their advantage again. So yes, if Russia can make this more certain, quicker, at a lesser cost, right, and achieve some type of even temporary diplomatic settlement with the collective West, they will try their best to play the diplomatic game to achieve that, because that doesn't cost them that much, right? It doesn't in military terms, to at least make the attempt. In fact, you could certainly make the argument that going through this diplomatic game wins them plaudits from their BRICS backers, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and others. It gains them the respect of the emirs, the leaders in the Middle East, and so forth, right? So there's a lot of arguments to be made. Now, I'm of the end opinion that this will only be settled on the battlefield, and only then where there be a diplomatic tying of it up, right? And that may be extremely, because I don't ever see this regime, whether Zelensky is, the head of it until the end or not. But I never see this Banderite fascist regime in Ukraine surrendering, right? Yeah. It'll retreat to Lvov if it has to. It will go. It become a shadow government run out of Poland, running guerrilla wars against Russia, right? There will always. It will never ever end or stop. And the U.S. will never acknowledge a Russian victory in Ukraine and officiate it, just like it never acknowledged and officiated a Russian victory in Syria. Why? Because there's always room for maneuver even after the war is over.
I want to move to, what time is it? Okay. I want to move to Iran just for about 15 minutes. I gave a monologue this morning where I was trying to give a white hat version of events and a black hat version of events. And what I mean by white hat is a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, meaning there's no 5-dimensional chess. Trump is going into negotiations. There were some reports that he was actually trying to get a deal in a way that Joe Biden just didn't seem to care about it. And as I pointed out, over the course of him trying to get a deal, it escalated, meaning, like you said, last person in the room, Witkoff comes back, has one notion of, okay, we're going to lower the number of the amount of refining. And then all of a sudden it became, well, we need now the Libyan model. And, the white hat version of it.
Let's specify that, right? The Iran, the absurd demands that the Trump administration came out with last week, right, is that Iran must give up its entire civilian nuclear energy program, which they are entitled to under international law and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, right?
Which is different than what they started with, is my point.
Yes, absolutely. Completely different, right? And Russia, Russia built Bushehr, their nuclear power plants, right? And the other thing they're arguing is that Iran must give up all support for Shiite groups, the axis of resistance throughout the Middle East, right? Because the U.S. is allowed to have and arm proxies, but Iran is not, right? That's the nature of the game.
Yeah. So the reports were coming out that the U.S. and Netanyahu, or Trump and Netanyahu, were at odds. And part of this had to do with Mike Waltz being a spy for Israel, Trump being humiliated.
On the stand that Mike Waltz is a spy for Israel, you can say that 95% of the members of the House and the Senate and many people at other levels are spies for Israel, right?
Agreed.
I'm not saying literally. I'm just talking about the enormous influence that IPAC has, right, on right, which Mearsheimer and Stephen Waltz have remember written the book on the Israeli lobby and its pernicious effect on American foreign policy. Right?
Agreed. But Waltz had the Signal app where he was literally sending secret documents to Israel, right? And so Trump, according to reporting, felt some kind of way about it, felt like he was being maneuvered, was humiliated by it, got rid of Waltz, and started to be more punitive to Israel. So in one case, allowed Yemen to say, hey, if you don't attack us, we don't attack you. But you can still attack Israel if you want. Israel was apparently blindsided by it. The Saudi Arabia thing, effectively allowing the nuclear power plant to go up without the recognition of Israel, meaning he started to take action against Israel. Even the Hamas thing, where he started to have back channel communication with Hamas, sidelining Israel. Witkoff goes and speaks to the family saying Israel's fault because Israel wants to keep the war going as opposed to getting rid of the hostages. And so a white hat version of this is, okay, maybe he feels some kind of way about Netanyahu, and Trump being a petty man is acting like a petty man and is now taking certain action that's against Israeli interests. Okay, fast forward to Iran. Well, the black hat version of this is, yeah,
this is
all
also
that's
a complicated
nice.
plot to go to war with Iran.
Exactly. That all things being equal, that, yeah, all of this is nice, but this is side stuff. The reality of it is Trump escalated demands in a way that he knew full well that that Iran was not going to accept from the very beginning, because they said from the very beginning, this is not something we're going to accept. And
why didn't Trump just bomb Iran? If he really wanted to, why didn't he just bomb Iran? No one would question that if he did.
For the exact same reason that Putin is going through the motions of this idea of I'm being a peacemaker. Zelensky is saying, okay, I'm waiting for peacemaker. Meaning there's political, let's say, gravitas, or let's say political credibility built into this notion of we at least tried to make peace. It's like, why didn't George Bush just immediately bomb Iraq? He could have. But what did he do? He went through this entire peace process to make it look as if, well, we tried. We did everything we could, which is exactly what Trump is doing right now. The weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, weapons of mass destruction in Iran. We need to go through a peace process for Iraq. We need to go through a peace process for Iran.
A degree of diplomatic and political subtlety to Trump that Trump has not evidenced at all anywhere else or in this. I don't think it really cares. First of all, if he said we're going to attack Iran tomorrow, there would be no diplomatic consequences in the United States because it is a bipartisan position in the United States for the support of Israel and for the hatred of Iran.
Policy documents, though, explain exactly what's taking place right now. Go through the negotiations, try to get this kind of world credibility that you at the very least tried to get negotiations blow up. And it gives you a pretext and a context by which you can now strike Iran saying we did everything we could.
There might be some people in Trump's administration who are taking a playbook from policy papers.
Yes.
But I very much doubt that Trump has a grand vision of policy paper.
Right? I agree with you. Yeah. But the people around him, though, do.
This is the evil boy. This isn't a matter of the good czar being misinformed and manipulated by the evil boyars, right? The evil nobles. This is a matter of the evil boyars are bending the ear of the evil czar, right? That's what it is, right? Yes. It's not him being manipulated. He courts this argument of opinion, right? There's a reason why he composed his administration of 90% neocons again and 10%, other weird outliers, right? So he wants that argument presented. I've seen this more as a bumbling clown show with different figures within the administration pressing their arguments and their individual policies forward, right? So a lot closer to the white hat version of what you see. There might be some people in his administration openly wearing that black hat, but I just don't. Trump is not a hat wearing guy.
Yeah,
I mean, he's not. He's got that thing up there, right?
I mean, he clearly put himself in a position very early on saying, if we can't get a deal, we're going to bomb you. Yeah. And then to escalate his demands. Because Witkoff in the very beginning, like even Aragachi, the foreign minister of Iran, he says the U.S. keeps changing its demands. Like basically, they don't know what they want.
Yeah,
And
they don't. Because
it's like,
there's
how do we come to a deal?
the administration is divided on this. So here's what I think happens. I think that at some level, Trump and maybe a number of people around him really don't want a war in the Middle East, just like the Biden administration didn't want a war in the Middle East. It's not that they never want a war in the Middle East. They just don't want one now during their administration. They've got other priorities. He wants to settle Ukraine. That's still a problem. And he wants to pivot to Asia. Every president since Obama has wanted to pivot to Asia and has been unable to do so. Right.
Yeah.
So he comes in doing Trump diplomacy, right? Which is give me what I want or I'll break your leg and burn down your cousin's house. That is the mafia style diplomacy that Trump does, right? He does it in every situation. He comes out, with bluff and bluster and angry words, and 7 times out of 10 people have given in because it's the United States, right? Let's be clear there. China didn't, but China doesn't have to because China is enormous. China is China,
Right.
but many other countries, including India, have quietly, acquiesced or at least hid in the background, or let's meet behind closed doors in a smoky room and settle this kind of thing, But that's that is what Trump intends, right? This is the art of the deal. This is New York real estate style of diplomacy, right? Like mafia leg breaking stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, but there are people within his administration who want to give Israel the U.S. war against Iran that they want. So they're pushing for it. So my first assumption was that what Trump was looking for was a JCPOA 2.0 because he ripped up the first one just because it was Obama's, right? 2.0 rebranded, with a Trump trademark and some tacky gold lame covering, right? That he can say
he was. According to
he
Witkoff,
was, right? But then last week he changed, right, out of the administration, which means someone in his administration bent his ear and this absurd demands that can only lead to either Trump backing down, right, or war, right? Now, there's another argument that this could be another style of bluff, that the Trump will back down from this, but use that in diplomacy. I can't give you my first son, but I'll give you my second son. How's that, right? That kind of argument from on high and then being able to walk down from it. That's possible, but even that might be giving the Trump administration too much. I think someone close to him talked to him 15 minutes ago or whatever and convinced him, that the U.S. could get all of that, right? And that Iran would give in. That leaves them in a tough situation, right? This is like Trump declaring victory over the Houthis. The Houthis capitulated. Well, that's not really what happened, right? I mean, it's not quite that the U.S. capitulated either. It was the U.S. says, yeah, this game isn't to my advantage. I'm getting out of here. We're not gonna try to defend shipping. But notice that the Houthis haven't attacked any commercial shipping in the Red Sea since December. They have continued, however, to launch missiles at Israel.
Right.
That's what they've done, right? Trump had to accept that. He can't stop the Houthis' attacks on Israel.
That's a loss. He wasn't able to accomplish his war aims.
Well, I mean, that depends on yeah. I mean, I consider that a loss for the U.S. and that's what they get for trying to play whack-a-mole against the Houthis in the deserts of Yemen. Wasted, again, more air defense missiles, more long-range strike missiles, and got no effective results from it. But they did hit the Houthis hard enough that the Houthis came to an agreement that they wouldn't attack U.S. warships anymore.
Right.
So it's not quite the 100% victory for the Houthis that some are portraying it from. I would say it's 70% in the Houthis' favor. Once again, to do that against the superpower, right?
Yeah.
The fake hyperpower again is quite an accomplishment, right? But people are trying to present it as one side or the other, and it's a bit more nuanced than that. But people don't like complication. They want a simple story, right? Trump, the Houthis capitulated, or the Houthis won, right? I mean, people always want the simple story, and there's very rarely a simple story.
Well, it's kind of hard to put nuance in the title. I guess my point is, he is in a box. Like the notion that you start off saying, we're going to bomb you, we're going to bomb you. He does this for months, by the way.
Yes.
And now he's like, okay, I can't get a deal now because they're not going to give me what I want. And it's very possible that Iran elements want a skirmish in the same way that Russia was able to take its dignity at the barrel of a gun. Well, it may take Iran to do the same thing. In this case, with the US going into unpredictable territory, if indeed they end up with an attack. And
I
don't
very
know
much
how-
doubt that there's many elements in Iran that want a fight at any level with the United States, right?
How does Trump back down from this?
How does Trump 1 week say Zelensky is a dictator and the next week say that, did I say that? That doesn't sound like something I say, right?
Oh,
and everyone
right.
just
He's
agrees.
so different.
He can do that the way no other US president can, because he's already presented himself as the madman. As
so different,
the fool ruling the court, right? He can change on a dime, right? Now, you can argue that hurts U.S. credibility. Trump hurts U.S. credibility every day, right? He bleeds, right? The whole tariff war, right? Everything. But as long as it doesn't affect the MAGA perception of Trump, Trump's okay with that, right? He doesn't need consistency. He can turn on a dime. So maybe he can walk away from it. I wouldn't say that that's what's going to happen, but I'm going to point out that Trump always has the ability to turn on a dime.
You realize, though, that when Witkoff came out, Koffi, give me a moment, I'm coming to you. When Witkoff came out and said, we're going to get Iran's enrichment down by 3.6% or something, Witkoff was attacked vigorously for that, meaning Trump capitulated. Trump failed. Trump gave in to the Iranians. And Witkoff turned on a dime after that and became a hard ass about we need the Libyan option. If we don't get the Libyan option, Iran can't have enrichment. I mean,
Witkoff doesn't have any beliefs. He's Trump's bagman. He's Trump's loyal and trusted bagman. Witkoff doesn't have any beliefs or opinions about anything in international relations.
No, my point is he is carrying Trump's point of view. And Trump's point of view has changed to no enrichment, no nuclear power, none of that stuff. And
so when
that is
convinced of that, yes.
I don't know how you get out that box. I guess that's my point.
He can, because Trump can just change his mind again.
And you think he's going to do
I would argue that other leaders can't do that, right? They can't so easily do that. Trump can.
And you think he's going to do that in this case?
Do I think he's going to do that? I have no idea what he's going to do, right? Again, my theory was JCPOA 2.0 rebranded by Trump. What happened in the last week, how that occurred, right? How that those absurd demands and what they're doing, what they're planning on doing now. And then the whole thing is muddied by this supposed lovers quarrel with Netanyahu, right? It's so muddy. I'm not going to venture. The Middle East is not my area of focus, right? And I'm not going to venture. And I will say before, I've said things about Trump enough and been wrong, right? And I cannot predict Trump. And I'm not the only one. John Mearsheimer just said that this weekend, too, in an interview. I have no idea what Trump's going to do, right? I mean, he makes our job very difficult, right? This is what Putin warned about. Is that when he said he wanted Harris or Biden rather than Trump is because Trump is unpredictable.
That's why I had to give the white hat and the black hat version of it, because I didn't know which. I was like, I'm cynical about this peace process. But
it's not a white hat or a black hat version. It's the orange man version.
Yeah. Mark? Always appreciate you, man. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSleboda1. You can check him out on Substack. Definitely check out his new channel, Real Politics with Mark Sleboda. That's going to be on Substack, correct? Yes, Substack. .com, marksloboda.substack.com. It is coming soon. Oh, that is going to be great. Patrons only. Mark, fantastic, man. Thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jamal. Good chat.
You have a good one. Be safe. All right. Yeah, what's that? It's not black hat, white hat. It's orange man. Fair enough. Let me bring in my next guest. We are joined with another fantastic guest, Koffi Kouakou. Koffi is an African analyst and research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Koffi, what's going on, man?
Yes.
How you doing today?
I'm doing fine, and yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm doing all right. Just trying to
Excellent.
figure out what the hell is going on. I wanted to bring you back on because, you know, when Ibrahim Traore went to Moscow, he received a hero's welcome. And I mean, a hero's welcome. And there was so much that I didn't know about him. A, he speaks Russian. B, apparently he was a scientist. Putin gives him this kind of glowing conversation. And there was even a video where he was talking about when he was a kid, he was listening to French on the radio, like French channels. And he was like, God, man, I'm being, you know, this was just straight propaganda that was not to the best interest of the Africans in the country that was listening to this nonsense. I read that they were getting uranium for 80 cents on, let's say, a pound or kilogram, or whatever the measurement is. And France was selling it for 200 of whatever that measurement was. That is astonishing. And the quote unquote democratic governments were allowing that to take place for years.
Yeah, that was in Niger with you know, the old guards who said they were elected democratically, and when President Chani came in and just ousted them, they found all these things out. It's just unbelievable.
Outrageous.
For decades, they've been just exploiting that uranium. Think about the amount of money and wealth they've just thrown out of this whole thing. And it's not just one country. I mean, you take Niger, you take Burkina Faso for gold and other stuff, Mali, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, I mean, Togo, Benin. I mean, then it goes on and on, all the way to Central Africa.
Wow.
So I think you've got a point there.
Just
But I know you wanted to touch a bit on Traore himself. And
I did, because I was super interested in this. For one, I didn't know that Burkina Faso had tens of thousands of troops that served in World War II. That's new to me. I didn't know that. Putin kind of mentioned that when he was having a conversation with him. I didn't know that Traore was a scientist as a profession. I didn't know he spoke Russian. When he went to Moscow University, they went bananas, especially the African students that were there. Like, there seems to be a close relationship between Russia and Africa. Like, I know Lumumba, Patrick Lumumba, they have like a street named after him in Russia. Like, there's interconnectedness between Africa and I guess the Soviet Union, but by extension, Russia, that I wasn't aware of, I guess, until Traore went over there. Go into that for me, just a little bit of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, much of the real history hasn't been sort of made visible to the rest of the world. Remember, after World War II, the spin was so big because I think the US had the ability to communicate anything, you know, seemingly. I mean, even today, most of us, even intellectuals, think that the US was the one who won this war, World War II, which all of us know about what's coming out more and more. I mean, the Russians lost 27 or so million, 24, 27 million, even more, because, I mean, the official numbers, the realities on the ground are different. You know, after the war itself was stopped, many people kept dying off and so forth for years. But in any case, what is important is that Russia was not part of what was called the scramble for Africa. So in large parts, the colonies of the European nations that colonized Africa and then stripped it into, now we have 54, let's say roughly 55 countries, 54 according to the United Nations, and then 55 according to the African Union, because the African Union includes Western Sahara, which is at the bottom of Morocco, and Morocco just doesn't want to hear that. But in any case, they managed to sort of carve out Africa with a scramble at the Berlin Conference, 1884 to 1885, January, well, from the day before Christmas of 1884 to January 1885. So they just got together and agreed that we've got to take this place because there's so much there we don't know. And they managed to carve out this continent until today. The carving has created so many problems because it split up different groups into segments. You can see the problem now in the eastern side of the Congo, where part of the groups there are not really fitting into Rwanda, nor Burundi, nor the DRC, so it's creating all sorts of things. It's not only there, it's at many places. So African borders have created enormous amount of damage, but the African Union has agreed to keep them. But it's not just keeping them, but they also struggle to manage the reality of these borders. And one way to come about to try to figure out, find a solution is to talk about one Africa, borderless Africa. I'm sure you've heard about this, and it came way back from Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, way back in the 60s, early 60s, saying one Africa, one army, one bank, and then one currency backed by gold, because Africa has got a lot of gold.
Right.
And at that time, the Soviet Union was not involved in this kind of, if you want, colonialism. And I think that's what really makes the Russia, which sort of the legal, I wouldn't say legacy of the Soviet Union, but sort of took it from there on its shoulders to deal with Africa. So most Africans don't see much of that. But in fact, the Soviet Union was helping a lot of struggle countries and liberators, quote unquote, to fight off the European colonial powers. But in Burkina Faso, in fact, the relationship between Russia and the Soviet Union started in 67. And then in 73 or so, I think it's 67, and then 73, for some reason, if I got my date right, Burkina Faso tied up with Taiwan, decided to have a relationship with Taiwan. But that being said, the Russians have always had some good. I know the relationship with Taiwan and China and so forth is very restrained. But what is clear is that the Russians have had some relationship with Burkina Faso for a long time, and now they are really getting back into building that relationship. So in 2023, Prime Minister Lavrov was in Burkina Faso to tie up that relationship again. It was just not a superficial relationship, serious one, upgrading to high level, not just political, diplomatic, but also economic, military, defense, security, all of that you want to think about. And so the young man of Burkina Faso now, I say young man, pardon my patronizing way of saying it.
37, yeah, you're young. I mean,
Yeah, very young. And he's managed to see the shift. And I've got 5 points that I'm going to share with you later, but key to it is he's managed to understand that he can't really compose anymore with Western nations, especially France, that was a colonizer, and then a lot of other European countries supporting French. Even today, they're still supporting France because the French, the CFA franc, which is that regional currency, is tied to the euro backed by the French. This is another colonial, so economic sovereignty is not quite clear.
Wait, just so I just want to understand that. The currency that Burkina Faso uses is a currency that's related to the French government?
Yeah, it was put together by the French, called the CFA. In French, I think it's Communauté Française d'Afrique. And so that money that was put together, I think in the mid 40s by former President de Gaulle, was managed to cut a deal because most African countries wanted to be free from French colonialism. And there was a lot of talks in the 50s to try to liberate countries. And many countries found ways to say, look, we want to still stay with France. Of course, they were coerced. Only few, if not one, Guinea, under President Sékou Touré, was the only one who said dignity or death, which in fact later on, Thomas Sankara took on. So he said no to France, and the French destroyed everything, infrastructure, buildings and everything else. In fact, they tried to create a false currency to destroy his economy, but they gave a hard time to Sékou Touré. Many other African leaders decided to stay with the French, and that staying with the French created a monetary zone, a monetary currency that was called the CFA franc. And it was backed by the French. Remember, we talked about this a couple of years ago, you and I, when you were still at Sputnik International.
Yeah. Okay.
And that combination of these countries, about 14 of them, they are using the same, in fact, 14 in West Africa. I think it's 14 in West Africa and then another 4 or 5 in Central Africa. But it's a monetary system that really keeps under slavery, economic slavery and financial slavery, all these countries, because the French central bank decide the interest rates, decide how much money they're going to use. When they need to spend money, they have to go and ask the French Reserve Bank.
Serious?
Yes, I'm not giving you everything because you'll be falling off. It is they're deciding almost everything. And they're trying to pull a coup. President Emmanuel Macron and President Ouattara of Cote d'Ivoire trying to short circuit a West African currency called the ECHO. And they used that same name to come up with something, but it didn't work. However, these countries are still under the economic control of France. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are trying hard to really escape it by creating their own bank, development bank. I'm sure you're aware that, backed by gold. And I think that's one of the reasons these 3 countries are still very involved in producing gold, because they want their money not to be a fiat currency, but to be backed by gold in the long run. And at that point, if they can have financial sovereignty, and we all know the principle, any free country must have a control on its own country, its own currency. If you don't have that, you have no freedom. You're still an economic slave. And I think that is the point. But to close in onto your key point, is that I think the 3 presidents of these 3 countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, understand that, especially the young man of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traore, and the invitation by President Putin to have him attend the May 19th victory celebration is enormous. I'll come down to that later, but there are 5 key points that are important. The 5 key points, the first one literally is the idea that that victory day is very symbolic, not just and sacred to the Russians, as well as also, if you want, very strategic. So inviting President Traore was about more than a ceremony. It was about sending a message to the rest of the world that we are now associating with other people. So the meaning was very profound. Also for Global South leaders were there, about 20 of them were there, we understand. And so this is the first one. The second takeaway for me, and I think for many people, is that President Ibrahim Traore has become a rising global icon. I mean, you and I have talked about this off this show, that it is just unbelievable by observing it. The media, global media, Russian political circles, conversation, you just said it yourself at the university there, Moscow University, had standing ovation. So he's now made himself very visible in the spotlight and supported by President Putin, that's very powerful. So the interpretation is very simple, that he has become the face of the new African defiance against the West and against many of these, colonial powers. And then he is now asserting a shift away from the French, and then asserting also some kind of Pan-Africanism, and then making a bold and not just symbolic shift, but a breakaway from French dominance and Western dominance toward Moscow. He's one of the few African leaders who are not afraid to say, I am picking my case here. I'm not advocating the point about non-alignment and this and that. I'm very clear about it. And that he's made it very clear. So Traore is just not the Burkina Faso president, but again, as I said, he's a symbol, a generational symbol for a lot of young Africans who've been flying Russian flags all over the place and asserting African power, potential rise. So the symbolism is not just superficial, it's amplified and deep. And then let me close with the next two takeaways. The next one, the third one, is that this whole thing happened where Traore was at a place where the global South was now churning and turning again the idea of multipolarity. I mean, this is really important. And I think making that visible, being part of a new global architecture of multipolarity for President Traore is essential, because it's going to help him to be protected. I think this is the part that we need to emphasize, that he's not doing that just for free or for just showing off, but he needs the protection of Moscow. But of course, the protection of Moscow and China as well has a cost, but it's not the same cost as we see in the West, especially with President Trump, siphoning off or cutting deals on minerals all the time. It's a lot more bigger than this. So hosting him, it's not just, the Moscow thing was not just hosting him, but it was also a convincing convening of an alternative, joining some kind of G20 almost, not quite yet there, but of sort, and then being able to position the global South people as an alternative, a strategic alternative. But now the other takeaway is that Burkina Faso's strategic shift is very clear. The reality is, Traore understands it. You've got to have somebody to help you cut down military relationship with France, but also political and military with France, but also connect with people who can help you. And Victory Day was the best way to show that up. It's not just an image, but tell the French, hey, he's giving them the finger. And the French, Europeans, and the West are watching this very, very closely.
Yeah.
In terms of political identity, is building that and connecting to Moscow. This was a big Traore Moscow moment, we can say. And flagging that and planting that flag and then say, hey, and I'm sure you saw it also at the when he was at the soldiers. I think what do they call this? It's not the invisible soldier. There's another term at the soldiers.
Unknown. It's the grave.
Soldier.
Yeah.
Unknown.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's the grave of the what is the name of that thing? It's because we have something similar here.
A known soldier's tomb was something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. The symbol was so powerful. While everybody else was dressed in regular civilian attires, there's a young man showing up. He's dressed in soldier's attire, military attire, giving the due respect to those dead people. How powerful is that, Jamal?
Yeah.
And now it is really powerful.
Yeah,
and the last one for me is, again, a signal for Africa. If he can survive this, his stardom, his reputation speaks a lot for the hunger, the thirst for a lot of young people are saying, we need not just new heroes, but heroes who can translate that hero status into realities, back into the ordinary Burkinabe, the ordinary Africans, so that there's stability, governance, and then the result back home is very clear. So in short, sorry I was a bit long, but I thought this is something that I could share with you before we get into the nitty-gritty?
No, I mean, he has taken a lot on at a young age.
Yeah.
And I don't think you're undermining him when you're saying he's young. I think you're pointing out that, Trump is what, 80 something? Joe Biden was 80 something. Dianne Feinstein basically died in office. Like when you look at our political figure, these people are old in many respects. I think Obama was considered young when he came in. Obama might have been in his 40s. And so he is not just young, not just a symbol, but he is taking on, like you said, this mantle of a new Africa. And he is being presented to the world. I mean, because you're talking about all these BRICS nations and everyone else at Victory Day with, massive honors coming from the person who's the host, Putin, who, as you point out, many in Africa was holding up Russian flags because he was the one that beat back the imperialists who were trying to effectively colonize Russia. Like, it's a powerful symbol of somebody saying, we're elevating this guy. There is something to be said about so much expectation being put on him. That's pressure, right? Because the expectation is you're not just a symbol, you're a symbol who's translating that symbolism into a reality that is affecting people in a real world physical matter reality level. It's not just what people think about you. You also have to deliver in real terms. And if you can do that in real terms, then you become, there's this line from Cannabis, one of my favorite rap artists.
Yeah.
He says, if they can't stop you, you become something else. Which is legend. Like, meaning with all of the opposition that's basically put against them. I mean, people are trying to take his life, for God's sake. And they're trying to take his life because of what he is.
And in fact, that's what you're saying, it's really become the symbol of what it is supposed to be, especially in Africa, where most leaders are not really representing their own people. They can't convert their status as president and so forth into the realities and change the well-being of people. And he's a symbol of, somebody says, when courage meets vision, but also meets it in practice and in simplicity for itself. But of course, he has to diversify, his strategic alliances with many of these new partners, and he's going to do it with Russia. China is President Xi is watching him very closely as well. Turkey is also there. Of course, Iran, and even North Korea. They're also looking at sending people there for his security, which is really important. Wow. But one of the things most of us are worried about, extensive visibility, is one of my favorite motto is visibility leads to vulnerability.
Yes.
Let me say it again. Visibility leads to vulnerability. So he has to be very careful, because these guys out there are after him, especially Western-backed, disgruntled people, terrorists, or all kinds of groups. But so far, he's managed, after 2 years, to become an incredible symbol. This is no feat, Jamal. And people will do anything to support him. And I think when General Michael Langley of AFRICOM made this comment in Congress, people just woke up and they say, you're not going to be killing this guy or getting rid of him. The whole went right down the street. 2 days later on the weekend, all around the world, there was huge support. I mean, that we haven't seen that for any African leader in this modern time.
Wow. That is, my audience had been asking about him, and they were pointing out like, hey, he needs support. The people are trying to go after him. They're trying to effectively destroy, because that's the other catch, right? If you can destroy him on some level, then the next person who may take that spot may think twice, which is kind of the point, right?
Indeed, that's the point they're trying to make, trying to discourage other people and then stifle the emerging, freedom elements within the youth, within anybody else. But this time they might struggle a bit, but you can't really sleep on those things with these people. They always have the infiltration, all sorts of people. But we're hoping that he's going to last, and he's going to change the nature of the relationship between leaders and the people in Africa. And I was telling a good friend of mine, many months ago, I said, many years in fact, that this wave coming from the Sahel is blowing hard down south all the way to South Africa.
Yeah.
So leaders better be careful and make sure they do things right.
Koffi, man, thank you for this. I really wanted a background of this, which is why I put you on. I wanted more information, especially after learning some of the stuff about him. I was just fascinated by it. He is extremely interesting, and Lord knows, I hope, I hope the symbolism translates into reality, and I hope it stays in that way. And as you say, blows, south, right to the rest of Africa. Koffi Kouakou, he's an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you for this, Koffi. I really appreciate it,
Thanks
man.
for having me always, Jamal. All the
Man,
best.
appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, I am going to go from one guest to the next. We are joined with the man himself, looking sharp today, Hamza Salam. He is Pakistani journalist. He's founder and editor of Pakistan Daily and former reporter for Pakistan, the News International. Hamza, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being able to join me. I know this was somewhat short notice. I wanted to get you on, especially with the ceasefire, more truce. I don't know what you call it. Give me your take on that. The prime minister, I have the clip of him effectively declared victory at the end of that. I mean, basically, it was a couple of days skirmish. Was it really a victory in the sense of a war? Give me your take, just in general, on the ceasefire and everything else up to this point.
Well, the ceasefire was a surprise to many Pakistani and Indian analysts. Escalations had gone to the peak shortly before the ceasefire was announced by President Trump on his Truth social app. So that's how the world found out that Pakistan and India had achieved peace. And it was a welcome step, at least in Pakistan, since, the Pakistani side believes that Pakistan was a victim of Indian aggression. So, the announcement of the ceasefire was welcomed earlier in the night. Even myself in Lahore and other Pakistani citizens had heard loud bangs in Lahore, in Islamabad, in Rawalpindi. So, such instances have the potential to significantly worry civilian populations who have nothing to do with any conflict between two great militaries. So the ceasefire announcement was welcomed by the Pakistani side, although on the Indian side, we have seen a very different response to this ceasefire announcement. Perhaps they have not welcomed this external intervention, or what they're calling it external intervention, since India and New Delhi see themselves as a great regional power. So, perhaps they are not that inclined towards this ceasefire agreement, and we will see how this goes on in the coming days. But now, just a few minutes earlier, the DGMOs, the Director Generals of the military operations from both sides, have spoken in a special hotline. So to confirm the ceasefire, and there have been no violations in the last 24 hours, or none have been reported so far. So, we were on the brink of war, and yes, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif did declare victory because Pakistan had inflicted much more damage to India than India inflicted to Pakistan. Pakistan downed over 5 Indian jets, which has now been confirmed by international sources. India did not even shoot down a single one. So, in terms of the damage caused, I think that yes, Pakistan had the least amount of damage, which is why Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif declared victory.
Okay. Okay, I'll go with that. That has been disputed. I'll go with that. Like, look, I was able to confirm at least one jet being shot down. There might have been others. Both sides seem to have done damage to each other. So I'm going to go with the fog of war for a bit until a little bit more data comes out, especially with this being so early. But I accept what you're saying. I am super interested in what Modi says. You're right. There were many Indian sources that were completely against the ceasefire. The guy who went on, I think it was one of the generals, went on TV and attacked the Iranian foreign minister,
It was,
and India
it was
had to
Major,
apologize.
he's a retired major. He's a very interesting character. His name is
Yeah.
Major Retired Gaurav Arya. He runs the Chanakya Forum, and it's
Yeah.
said to be an Indian military funded platform. And he used extremely derogatory language against the Iranian foreign minister
Yes,
who was
he did.
visiting New Delhi at the time. So, on behalf of the people
Yes,
of
he did.
Pakistan, we would like to thank Mr. Major Gaurav Arya for enhancing Pakistani-Iranian ties and for single-handedly destroying Iranian and Indian ties in such a precarious situation. So thank you, Major Gaurav Arya.
Yeah, it was very weird. It was very wild. They clearly had some feelings about it. They didn't seem to want to stop it. There's a thing to be said, though, that Donald Trump really didn't. Did Trump? Okay, let me ask you. I'll ask the question. Did Trump really intervene into this, or was it both sides just started communicating with each other to bring it down? I don't doubt that Trump was in communication, or let's say Trump's people were in communication with both sides. But was that the thing that really brought down and brought a truce?
Well, the exact details of the ceasefire, how it transpired, how the situation changed from escalation to ceasefire, still remains to be seen. We're seeing conflicted information from both sides, so I think it would be premature to form an informed analysis at the moment. But what we do know for sure is that as soon as President Trump announced the ceasefire, just minutes after, Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq Dar, he confirmed that the ceasefire had been achieved, and the Pakistani mainstream media and the Indian mainstream media reiterated the announcement of the ceasefire. So yes, we can, with a reasonable confidence interval, we can analyze that yes, Washington did play the most important role in ensuring such a ceasefire, because the thing about Washington is that it enjoys a very close relationship with both New Delhi and Islamabad. So it does have mutual leverage on these two global powers. And it is understandable in the sense that while the international community as a whole were trying to ensure de-escalation, ultimately, President Trump had the trump card. And, he ensured that, both these countries fall in line, because we do have to understand in Pakistan and in India that ultimately the United States is still militarily the most powerful nation on earth. So when the US president says something, the leadership in Pakistan and India take it very seriously.
Come on, Hamza. The United States is not going to militarily attack Pakistan or India. Like, meaning why? Why would India, or for that matter, Pakistan, have to listen to anything that Trump is going to tell them in regards to the ceasefire?
Well, of course, the United States is not going to attack Pakistan or India, but the United States is a huge military supplier in Pakistan. The United States has supplied F-16 jets to Pakistan. The United States has helped Pakistan economically. The United States has nudged the IMF to ensure that Pakistan's external funding is ensured. And in regards to India, there's a lot of trade deals between New Delhi and Washington. So, the United States has a lot of leverage and, means of persuasion, which perhaps may not extend to the military realm, but, it has other tactics, which most probably has ensured this peace. But one more dynamic, which I think is pertinent to mention, since we were talking about, the military aspect of this affair. So I think the most important fact of this war, and we are calling it a war rather than a skirmish or an operation. So in this war, a very important dynamic which we saw was the downing of, French Rafale jets by Pakistan, China's JF-17C. So this is Chinese technology which has been developed by Pakistan, and they are doing it mutually. So I think this is a turning point in history in which an Eastern air defense system and attack system has destroyed a fighter jet which is 8 times the cost of the French Rafale jet. So I think the United States eyebrows were raised when they saw a Chinese fighter plane, down a French fighter plane so easily. Even if we go with, what has been confirmed by French sources, that even if only one Rafale jet was fallen, I think that Washington was in overdrive to ensure that, there are no further embarrassments for Western arms manufacturers, and Chinese weapon systems don't get so much marketing and advertisement, because we have seen their share prices significantly increase following this aerial dogfight. So the United States had a lot of reason to ensure that this ceasefire happened. You're muted.
And to be fair, India would not confirm when they were asked how many of the planes were down. They was like, we're not going to talk about this militarily. If the answer was 0, they would have said 0. They didn't say 0. So clearly they were shot down. And it's been confirmed. I mean, there were images of the missile knocking the thing out of the air with the jet firing flares to try to get away. So you're right, that it did down some of those planes, which is astonishing to watch, to put it mildly. Do you think this is going to last? Meaning, is this a binding truce up to this point? Or do you expect this not to hold? I mean, Modi apparently is giving a speech coming up. I don't know what he's going to say in the speech. But do you think are we going to see this flare up again, or is this over with from your point of view?
Well, it's definitely not over. Peace in South Asia hangs by a very delicate thread. And we have seen, how aggression and how hyper-nationalism has the potential to result in nuclear war between these two neighbors who have acquired significant nuclear arsenal. So, this is not child's play. And this is very serious. This is the hottest nuclear flashpoint in the world right now. And the international community is rightly taking this situation very seriously. And, just minutes after, or just maybe 2 or 3 hours after the ceasefire was announced, we received in our newsroom at the Pakistan Daily, we received certain information suggesting that India had violated the ceasefire and there was drone activity in Pakistan. And in India, on Indian media, we saw claims that Pakistan had violated the ceasefire. But few hours later, these claims were not repeated. And, both sides held the fact that the ceasefire was being maintained. But I think that this is not the end. Perhaps this is the beginning of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end or the end of the end, because the Kashmir issue has been going on for a few decades. Pakistan and India have fought multiple wars over this. So unless, the underlying issues, Kashmir, unless it is not resolved, I don't see this situation de-escalating in the long term. And it also seems that, okay, fine, since New Delhi and Islamabad are under international pressure to keep the ceasefire, perhaps on the international working boundary, we will see the ceasefire. We won't see any aerial combat, but we can see war by proxy, which has happened before. It may well happen again. We can see skirmishes across the line of control, the LOC. We can see excursions by either force. So while yes, diplomacy has won the day so far, I do think that the situation will escalate, and this is far from over.
But Hamza, India is not talking. Okay, India is not talking about nukes. Pakistan is, and even when this first started, India wasn't never talking about nukes. India was talking about a very specific operation that they were running, and obviously, if they're attacking the country is going to respond. But Pakistan, or at the very least to say people speaking on behalf of Pakistan, immediately escalated to nuclear war. And it's like, it's like, whoa, they're talking about nukes. And they were effectively saying, we will respond. And with this notion of potentially, with this vague threat of nuclear war always hanging in the background, India never really did that. India never really talked about it in the context of nuclear war. They talked about it in the context of, we have a specific operation that we're doing. Like, or do you disagree with that? I mean, even in your statement right there, you was like, this could go to nuclear war. India was never saying it in those terms.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, you're right, but we have to analyze the military strategies, stated military policies of these two nations. So Pakistan has a policy of quid pro quo plus, which translates into a greater response to India, to any military aggression by India. India, on the other hand, abides by a no first use policy. So, these are the stated stratagems of these two militaries. And, in regards to
Wait, just
Pakistan,
so I'm understanding that. You're saying India has no first strike, meaning Russia has no first strike, right? It's like their thing is we're not going to fire nukes first. But you're saying Pakistan does have a first strike policy.
yes, Pakistan does not have a no first strike policy, which implies that, yes, they can strike first. We have not agreed to the no first use policy. And I think that there is a very important reason for it. So, if we have the statistics of both these militaries, the armed forces, the Navy and the Air Force, we see how many aircraft India has, how many, aircraft carriers they have, what naval assets they have. They have nuclear submarines. Pakistan does not have a nuclear submarine. So, in a conventional war, India outmatches Pakistan by any standard of comparison. So the only thing which Pakistan has as a deterrence in order to ensure that there is stability in South Asia is the nuclear card. I can guarantee to you that if Islamabad did not have nuclear power, we would be under Indian hostility, under Indian brutality, just like our brothers in Kashmir. So these assets guarantee stability in South Asia. Without these weapons, there's no stopping India or a conventional warfare, because in a small time limited conflict, India can be maneuvered. Pakistan Air Force can exceed expectations, and they can defend their motherland. But in an extended conflict, the Indian military has a 10 times larger budget than Pakistan, almost 10 times larger. So it's apples and oranges. It's a different ball game. So the nuclear power is the only thing guaranteeing stability in South Asia.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. The balance of power is different in a conventional war. And so the nuclear option is the balancing between a larger military from the standpoint of India versus a smaller military from the standpoint of Pakistan. I see. Okay, that makes sense. I understand. Wow. I would tell you, I am glad this did not escalate. I am glad this is trending down at this point. I do have one more question. Imran Khan, what is going on with him currently?
Well, he is still in prison, and he is facing his multiple charges, and he is in Adiala jail in Rawalpindi. He has his own space. He has gym equipment. He has access to, good food made by great chefs. The menu of his food has been shared with journalists. So he's relatively comfortable. He meets his family members. Sometimes he meets his lawyers. Sometimes he meets his party leaders. He remains, or before this conflict, because a lot has changed in Pakistan in the last few days. Before this conflict, there was no doubt that Imran Khan was the most popular individual in the country. But after this conflict, we are seeing that he is perhaps, going into irrelevance, or, he's just not that important anymore in the Pakistani psyche or mindset. And there was an anti-establishment and an anti-army sentiment predominantly from his supporters. But now, after this war, we are seeing that even his closest supporters, who were the biggest critics of the Pakistani military and its outreach into politics, even they have become the biggest cheerleaders of the military. And for that, we have no one else to thank but the Indian Prime Minister Modi and the Indian Armed Forces, who have, created a very nationalistic, patriotic sentiment in Pakistan. And, whoever is not falling in line, is just being ignored. And, Imran Khan's statements, or, his narrative, or, his problems, are just being ignored by the media and, on Pakistani Twitter. And, even his own supporters are focused perhaps more on the war rather than on Imran Khan's state.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Interesting. Hamza, man, thank you for this. I wanted Pakistani perspective. I wanted to know what was effectively going on in the country in regards to the way they were talking about it. I appreciate this. I definitely do, man. Hamza Salam, just to give the bio, he is a Pakistani journalist. He is the founder and editor of Pakistan Daily and former reporter for Pakistan's The News International. You have a fantastic night. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You have a good one. All right, guys, we have come to the end. Kurt, don't be a bad guy, Kurt. Don't be a bad guy. He was nice enough to come on. Laugh 66. What is this? Trump falling out with Israel. Trump. Oh, in response to Trump falling out with Israel, Trump is owned by Israel. This is to enable financial deals with Saudi this week. Look at who is Trump to Saudi Arabia, BlackRock, etc. This also is possible cover for a coming attack on Iran. Look, that was my thought. I agree with you on that. This idea for Trump to say, "Oh my God, I can't believe Israel attacked Iran. We had a falling out. We didn't know anything about it." That was the way. Again, that's the black hat version, right? That this is not what it seems. That all things being equal, all of these moves that Donald Trump are making are small potatoes in comparison to the larger ultimate thing of hitting Iran. I do believe there's a value that especially Western countries, liberal countries, get out of this idea of peace negotiations, even when they're used as a stalking horse for assaults and attacks. And I think he put himself in a box. I know Mark thinks, he could turn on a dime. And maybe he could. It would not shock me if Trump attacks Iran, but it wouldn't shock me either if Donald Trump accepts a deal and then runs around acting as if the deal is something different than the JCPOA, or acting as if, a face-saving mechanism so he doesn't have to do the attack. Or he says, "Hey, look at what I got. Look at what I got." I would tell you this, Laugh, also. I had this impression that Donald Trump's threats against Iran felt desperate. It felt like, I don't know, that felt like he was desperately trying to get them to accept whatever he was putting out. Almost as if, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But I'm stuck in this position where I feel like I need to do this for my own political credibility. In which case, I'm going to make all of these threats with the idea that they're going to accept because of my threats. Missing the fact that if you would have just dealt with them even-handedly, you could have still gotten the deal, and that they were not going to ever accept your threats in that sense, because they couldn't accept your threats as a sovereign nation in that sense. Like, I don't know. I could be wrong. We'll see. Like Mark said, Orange Man has his own playbook. He could very well de-escalate, take a deal, and then run around and scream that it's a great deal. But I don't know. That's why I gave you both white hat, black hat. That, I had a falling out with Israel. And so why would I ever attack Iran or help Israel attack Iran? Because I had a falling out with Netanyahu. Look at all of the things that I did in this falling out. But it could be the white hat thing. Yeah, I'm pissed off at Netanyahu, but I'm stuck in my rhetoric in regards to me saying I'm going to attack. And my own neocons that are around me that may have nothing to do with Netanyahu directly per se, are pushing me to escalate and maximize my demands. And they told me, because I don't know anything about Iran, that if I threaten them, they would give me what I want. And oh my God, they're not giving me what I want. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Laugh 66, the terrorists in Pakistan are funded and supported by the United States intelligence. And Neil must know this. Yeah. Yes and no. Yes, you're right. Mujahideen, Taliban, some of these other groups, 1000% yes. But Pakistan uses them also. Pakistan uses them also. So it's not just, the US buys them and uses them. Yeah, they're used for the West, but they're also used at the behest of Pakistani military when they want to accomplish certain objectives. So yeah, Laugh, I agree with you, but it's a little bit more complicated. It's not just the US buying them. Matthew, will they be NATO smash with Russia? I hope not. God knows I hope not. I mean, that's what Russia is preparing for. I mean, the whole building up two militaries, having the military on the border of Finland and building up military bases there, having the other military in reserve. The belief is that Europe wants to keep Ukraine engaged with Russia as they build up their own military armaments in order to build up their own armies where they can put down on the battlefield. That seems to be what they want. That seems to even be what the United States wants. When Trump is like, we want to freeze the conflict and we want NATO to spend 5% more. We want NATO to take over the European theater while we pivot to China. Okay, well, why does he want NATO to take over the European theater? Why he pivots to China? It's because he wants them to be able to effectively feed Europeans to the Russians at some point, while the US deals with one issue with the idea of coming back at a later date. Hey, you may get another Brandon president that's willing to do that. In the case of them, they seem to be trying to increase the military capabilities, but Europe is a basket case. And keep in mind, Europe is in massive amounts of debt. They've been deindustrialized because of the war with Ukraine. So any money that they may have had to put towards that, well, they're paying the US 5 times more for LNG, and Trump wants them to buy more LNG. And on top of that, if you think of the weapons that Europe is buying, okay, well, let's say like 70% of that money is going to the United States. So not only are they being deindustrialized for companies not being able to afford to pay for the energy costs, but the money that they do have is being sent out to the United States to pay for energy and weapons. Okay, so where are you going to get this money from, this magical amount, the stash of cash, to build up factories and to pay people to man those factories and to get education in order to educate people to function in those factories? That seems like a long-term objective. Russia had that power in reserve going back to the Soviet Union. Where the hell is Europe going to get it? Britain is a decayed military. France is a decayed military. Where are you going to get it? They couldn't put out 25,000 people. 25,000 people may get killed within a week in Ukraine. How are you going to do this? So that's the main question. So this notion of, is NATO going to smash? They will get eaten alive, just like they've already gotten eaten alive. Ukraine had the largest military in Europe. Russia went through them like Swiss cheese with, 150,000 troops? And now Russia is like 1 million men military with troops in reserve, new equipment in reserve. They're building up weapons left and right. They're building up Oreshnik missiles. This is not the monsters that you want to tangle with. And so you may get big talk out of Europe, but those leaders may be on their way out. I mean, if you think of Starmer, who's unpopular, you think of Macron, who they had to do everything in their power to keep the National Rally from winning, meaning they were literally horse trading in order to keep the National Rally from taking power, which is one of the largest parties in France. The AfD in Germany, again, one of the largest parties in Germany. I think they're like number 2. Romania, Simon is going to win that. Well, he's just Gogescu 2.0, which, we don't want the military base in Europe. Meaning you may get a situation where the political calculus changes because people don't want to be fed to the Russians after seeing what they did to Ukraine. So hopefully the answer is no. God willing, that answer is no. They can posture all they want. It's another thing to put troops in Ukraine and have those troops get killed and eaten alive. And by the way, Russia keeps making a point of this. If you notice, when they have those NATO meetings, what happened? Russia bombs those NATO meetings. They do it to make a point. When Rutte was there in Odessa, and then Rutte leaves, and they bomb Odessa immediately after, they're making a point. If you come here, you will die. You will die. Test us if you want. Hamza has a point of view. It's the Pakistani point of view. If you were listening to Pakistani media, that's what you'd see. Shobhan has a point of view. It is the Indian perspective of events. I gave you both for a reason, because I know that they were going to, yes, Mystic City, yes, it is. He's my guest. I appreciate him from coming on. But Mystic City, yes. All right, we have come to the end. We've come to the end. In fact, we're beyond the end. The propaganda behind North Korea is such, like everything else coming out of American history. Yeah, I wouldn't want to live in North Korea. I tell you that. I appreciate their willingness to back the Russians. I appreciate their willingness to see what the battlefield is like, of modern battlefield, and their enthusiasm. But no, I would not like to live there. Stay rocking that suit. Thank you for that. Imran was massively popular before this proposal. I suspect he's massively popular now. I don't buy Hamza's argument in this. Yeah, I don't buy his argument. Imran Khan was dramatically popular in that country. And, you know, India's point of view is that the reason why they did that in the first place was to draw popularity back to the military, which is cynical, but, you know, this conversation that I just had with Hamza kind of points out, if he's right, that it drew a lot of national fervor to the government, a government that was under pressure in border conflicts that the military was losing credibility with, especially what they did to Imran Khan. I don't buy the premise that that changes overnight. I just don't. I don't live there, so I don't know, but I just don't buy the premise. All right, I'm going to end this. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I want to thank all of you that gave. And by the way, you can now buy me a cup of coffee. I'm on that. Patreon, PayPal, Super Chat, Super Stickers. All of those things are helpful. All of those things keep the channel going, especially because they have started to demonetize these videos, which is aggravating. They demonetized Koffi's video on Ibrahim Traore. And I'm like, what the hell? What the hell? There's nothing in that video that is even controversial. Maybe because it's a hunter, but you know, one of the most fascinating things about that is that it is a hunter, and yet it's not treated that way. Like when the military takes over, under normal circumstances, people are outraged. In this case, people celebrate it. And I think the difference is you can have a quote unquote democracy that is not looking out for the best interests of the public, and democracy is crafted in a way to ensure that public interest is not seen, that everything is too difficult to do, everything is too difficult to pull off. And then you get the overthrow of somebody who says, I'm changing this. And ironically, the only way you could change it is by that overthrow, meaning there was no democratic solution to the problems that we're being presented with, because the democratic solution was put there specifically not to solve those problems. So then the catch becomes, okay, does the hunt to translate at some point into some kind of giving power back to the public? Is this a George Washington thing, right? I don't know, we'll see. Right now, he seems to be doing good things. But that's a curse and a blessing. A military hunter, one guy who's in charge. If the guy goes away and somebody sucks comes in, somebody sucks has a lot of power. In his case, though, he seems to be actually trying to do what's best for the public. So God bless him. I would say shout out to all of you. I want to thank all of you for joining, all of you for listening. Everybody who likes the video, thank you very much for it. Everybody who shares the video, thank you very much for it. Everybody who gives, Patreon, PayPal, Super Chat, buy me a coffee. I think that's the other one. All of those things are appreciated. All of those things, you have my infinite thanks for it. It keeps the show going, especially with YouTube and the way YouTube behaves. So you all have a fantastic day. I may see you a little bit later. I have been contacted by RFK's African-American coordinator, RFK Jr.'s, and we are supposed to have an interview. Okay, what the hell just happened? We're supposed to have an interview. That interview may take place today at 3 p.m. If so, I will see you then. I will say shout out to all of you. If he gets back to me, we'll set that interview up. I'm looking forward to that. That should be very interesting. But look, you guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas, Morning Show 152. 152 of these. Signing off. Have a good one all. Be safe.